Welcome back to the untamed depths, where mystery drifts with the currents and silence hides the most terrifying secrets. Tonight, we dive into an oceanic what if, a thought both thrilling and terrifying. What if the Megalodon, the greatest shark to ever exist, still prowled the waters of our modern world? Imagine a creature stretching over 60 feet in length, with jaws powerful enough to crush a whale's skull in a single bite. A predator that once ruled the seas, vanishing millions of years ago, yet never truly leaving our imagination. The Megalodon wasn't just a shark, it was an ocean-sized nightmare, a reminder of just how small humanity really is when measured against the scale of nature. But let's drift deeper into this possibility. What would it mean for the oceans we depend on? For the shipping lanes that carry our food and goods? For the whales we fight to protect? Or for the fragile balance of marine ecosystems already pushed to their limits? Would we find ourselves as prey? Or would our technology be enough to hold such a monster at bay? As the waves rise and the depths whisper, we'll explore the science, the myths, and the chilling consequences of a world where Megalodon never left. So settle in, let the tide carry you, and imagine the deep alive again with the shadow of the greatest predator that ever lived. Imagine plunging into the midnight blue, far below the sunlit surface where light dwindles into twilight. Your submersible's lamps flicker against the vast expanse, revealing nothing but drifting particles and distant silhouettes of deep-sea fish. Then, out of the dim, a shape appears massive, torpedo-bodied, its broad head cutting through the murk. You realize with a start, this is no modern great white. Its proportions are gargantuan, its fins the size of sailcloth, and rows of serrated teeth glint like ivory daggers. In that moment, you confront the shadow of a giant that was thought extinct for millions of years. A Megalodon still lurking in our oceans today. Megalodon, whose name means giant tooth, was one of the largest and most formidable predators ever to prowl Earth's seas. Living from approximately 23 to 3.6 million years ago, it dwarfed even the great white shark. Fossilized teeth and vertebral centra hint at individuals reaching lengths between 14 and 18 meters, with some estimates stretching up to 20 meters twice. The average size of today's oceanic apex predators. 1. To imagine such a creature in our contemporary oceans is to rewrite everything we thought we knew about marine ecosystems. The first fossil teeth were discovered in the 19th century. Their massive triangular blades, some over 18 centimeters tall, sparked wonder and debate among early paleontologists. Each tooth told a story of raw power, broad bases built to anchor crushing forces beyond 100,000 newtons, thick enamels capable of severing bone and cartilage in a single bite. Over time, thousands of these teeth washed up on beaches from Peru to Australia, Morocco to New Zealand, affirming Megalodon's worldwide dominion in prehistoric oceans. Yet until recently, we believed this titanic shark vanished with the cooling of Miocene seas, prey shortages, and competition from emergent killer whales. Now, imagine a fathomless trench, an uncharted gorge in the Atlantic abyss, where temperatures remain stable and food chains thrive in relative isolation. Here, beneath crushing pressures that would implode unprotected vessels, a remnant population of Megalodon endures, feeding on migrating whales and giant tuna. Their massive tails propel them through the dark like living submarines, their keen electroreception detecting the faint heartbeat of a passing whale calf. Encounters would be cataclysmic. Modern sonar buoys would register returns unlike any known species. Colossal arches moving slowly, pausing to ambush pods of migrating dolphins. Submersible lights would reveal scratch-etched scars along a whale's flank. A single row of serrated wounds 3 meters deep. Capital ships crossing ocean trenches might detect. Deep water feedings by sudden depressions in the sea. Surface vacuums left by a feeding frenzy, so powerful it pulls water down with it. If Megalodon still swam today, Its presence would reshape marine corridors. Coastal fisheries would note unexplained declines in large fish populations. Whales might alter migratory paths to avoid shadowy hunting grounds. Climate change models would need to account for an apex predator whose metabolic demands rival those of entire shark families. Conservation priorities would pivot. Protecting beaches from shark nets would shift to safeguarding deep-sea refugia hidden sanctuaries where this ancient beast remains unseen. But beyond the scientific upheaval lies a deeper awe. In a world where every coast is charted and every ocean floor boasts high-resolution mapping, the idea of a living megalodon reminds us of mystery's enduring hold. It speaks to a primal fear and fascination. The darkness harboring life forms that dwarf our wildest imaginings. Even as we extend our reach with submersibles, ROVs, and autonomous gliders, the ocean preserves depths beyond human sight depths that could conceal a relic of Earth's distant past. So let the image of Megalodon slipping through midnight currents linger in your mind. Picture its vast jaws opening in slow motion, muscles rippling along its flanks as it locks eyes with an unwary calf. Feel the tremor of fear in your bones as you recognize a predator that transcends time. And remember, even in an age of satellites and global soundscapes, the ocean's shadowed realms remain the final frontier, harboring giants whose legends continue to captivate our sense of wonder. Imagine Earth's oceans not as the familiar blue expanses we sail today, but as vast theaters where monstrous creatures roamed in abundance, places shaped by warm currents, shallow seas, and nutrient-rich upwellings that fueled life on a colossal scale. In the Miocene and Pliocene epochs, roughly 23 to 3.6 million years ago, global temperatures averaged several degrees warmer than today, and sea levels stood tens of meters higher. Continental shelves, those gentle slopes that fringe every landmass, stretched far beyond their modern boundaries, creating sprawling lagoons, and epicontinental seas where sunlight penetrated to nourish plankton blooms, and where the stage was set for giants to flourish. On those vast shallow plains, phytoplankton thrived in oceans, flush with iron and phosphorus, carried from weathered mountains and volcanic soils. Seasonal monsoons and global wind patterns drove upwelling currents that delivered cold, nutrient-laden water to the surface, igniting explosive pulses of life. Zooplankton fed on microscopic plants, and schools of small fish condensed into shimmering clouds beneath sunlit waves. These teeming masses in turn attracted larger predators, from bill-fishing sailfish to torpedo-bodied mako sharks. But the ocean's greatest gems were its whales, not yet burdened by baleen specialization, gliding through temperate seas on their way to filter massive swarms of krill and copepods. The pinnipeds and sirenians of that era also reached impressive sizes. Dugong-like sea cows grazed seagrass beds in what are now arid coastlines, while pinnipeds, ancestors of modern seals and sea lions, developed body masses rivaling small cars. Sea turtles with shells as wide as kitchen tables foraged on coastal flora. Moon jellyfish draped their tentacles like underwater tapestries along reef margins, and schools of teleosts, early relatives of tuna and tarpon, grew heavier than any modern fish. In such a world, Megalodon rose as the undisputed leviathan. Carcharocal's Megalodon, the giant tooth, measured between 14 and 18 meters long on average, with maximum estimates pushing close to 20 meters, a predator twice the length of today's great white. Its head alone could span 3 meters, jaws unhinging wide enough to swallow a small car, clenched with over 276 serrated teeth, each measuring up to 18 centimeters. Scientists estimate its bite force exceeded 100,000 newtons, capable of shearing whalebone as effortlessly as a hot knife through butter. Imagine those rows of triangular blades slicing into the blubbery sides of baleen whales, each cut severing muscle and fat in one vicious sweep. Yet Megalodon did not hunt alone. Smaller sharks, ancient marshes, and relatives of modern threshers stalked the schools of fish, while long-snouted megapredatory dolphins tested the boundaries of pack hunting. Even in the ocean's upper tier, creatures competed for supremacy. Killer whales, though not yet the modern orcas we know today, had emerging ancestors experimenting with group tactics and multi-sensory hunts. But nothing matched the solitary might of Megalodon. As global cooling began in the late Pliocene, ocean currents shifted. Ice sheets expanded from the poles, drawing down sea levels and fragmenting continental shelves. Nutrient cycles changed, upwelling patterns altered, and prey populations migrated or dwindled. Whales became more specialized. Mysticetes evolved baleen plates for filtering ever tinier plankton, leaving larger prey scarcer. Competition from proliferating odontocetes, toothed whales and dolphins, further stressed food chains. Eventually, Megalodon could not sustain its enormous energy demands, and its line ended about 3.6 million years ago. Now, imagine that extinction never occurred. Envision a modern ocean where pockets of warm, deeper water remain shielded from surface changes areas scientists call abyssal refugia. These remote trenches and canyons, charted only partially by sonar, could sustain remnant populations of Megalodon. Instead of thriving in shallow coastal shelves as their ancestors did, today's giants might adapt to cooler, offshore waters warmed by internal currents mixing with geothermal vents. In this hypothetical present, the oxygen-rich waters above submarine ridges would form feeding grounds. Megalodon could follow migrating whale pods, using its electrosensory ampullae of Lorenzini to detect bioelectric fields from hundreds of meters away. When a pregnant humpback surfaced to breathe, an ancient tooth hungered. Flukes splashed as the shark lunged, muscles coiling to deliver a burst of speed that ordinary oceanic life could not match. Its jaws would clamp on a calf's flank, severing tissue at once, fueling the shark's colossal metabolism. But large predators leave noticeable traces. Modern sonar arrays would register enormous moving shadows, 15-meter arches gliding through sound maps like drifting submersibles. Fisheries in deep-sea channels trawl for tuna and swordfish. Fishermen would find nets shredded, hooks gnawed through thick cord, gear lost where no great white ever ventured. Underwater cameras moored on hydrothermal vent platforms might capture fleeting glimpses of massive dorsal fins cutting through thermal plumes as the shark hovered in search of food. Ecosystem responses would ripple outward. Whales might reroute migrations, following less productive but safer feeding grounds. Pods of dolphins would form tighter clusters, using complex vocalizations to ward off the ancient predator. Giant squids and colossal cuttlefish in the mesopelagic might adjust dial vertical migrations, diving deeper or emerging earlier to avoid intercept. Smaller sharks like the modern great whites and makos would face new competition for food, their numbers dwindling in response to a revived apex consumer. Apex predator reintroduction on land provides a parallel. Wolves in Yellowstone reshaped elk behavior, restored willow groves, and even altered river courses through trophic cascades. In the ocean, a restored Megalodon would rewire marine food webs. Seals and sea lions would stay closer to rocky shores. Whales might spawn in less predator-dense lagoons, and seamount seafloor communities would see nutrient pulses from the leftovers of Megalodon kills. Carcasses of beaked whales killed in deep canyons would become Megalodon anchor points for specialized scavengers. Giant amphipods and hagfish swirling around enormous vertebrae. Yet the largest challenge remains reproduction. Modern warm bays like Florida's waters could serve as nursery grounds, akin to shark pupping sites. Pregnant females might return each year, seeking depths where juvenile Megalodons can grow in relative safety. Observations of juvenile whites in the Bahamas hint at temperature and predator-controlled nursery laws. Megalodon pups, possibly 3 to 4 meters long at birth, would still dwarf adult great whites, requiring substantial food. Tourist beaches might see signs. Warning: juvenile predator in bay swimming prohibited. In colder waters, where modern great whites abide, Megalodon would need thermogenic adaptations. Evidence from great white heat retention in red muscle tissue suggests sharks can elevate body temperatures above ambient. A revived Megalodon might develop enlarged red muscle networks or vascular countercurrent heat exchangers, preserving warmth in its core as it patrolled 4 degrees Celsius waters off Newfoundland. Thermal imagery from unmanned gliders might detect large warm-bodied shadows in deep fjords, startling oceanographers. Human responses would be as varied as marine lives. Some fisheries would install deep water nets and sonarscapes to detect approaching giants. Remote submersibles would patrol migration corridors during whale calf season. Conservationists might propose protective zones for both whales and these revived sharks, arguing for a re-wilding of the oceans. Yet fears would run high. Shipping lanes could become no-go zones if Megalodon were known to lurk at the continental slope. Regulations would require cargo ships to travel at speeds that minimize acoustic and vibrational detection. The presence of such a predator would kindle deep cultural anxieties. Stories of ship disappearances would re-emerge. New tall tailies of trawlers heeled by powerful tail thrusts or deep-sea rigs collapsed by stray Megalodon bumps. Marine biologists would recount narrow escapes, divers finding themselves face-to-face with a fossil brought to life, rotates its spinal column to stare with black, lidless eyes. Each sighting a sonar blip, a chewed buoy, a fin slicing through foam would ripple across social media as proof of a hidden mountain in the sea. Yet for all the awe and terror, Megalodon's return might spark renewed interest in marine exploration. Unmanned underwater vehicles would pierce ocean mesh, chasing shadows in canyons. Deep-sea submersibles would map uncharted trenches, seeking the refuge zones where calves grow. Geneticists might examine ancient tooth DNA for clues to adaptability, while computational modelers simulate energy budgets and predator-prey dynamics in the current ocean state. As you drift in your submersible's blue-lit chamber, the idea of Megalodon swimming beyond the abyssal plain becomes more than speculative. It becomes a reminder that Earth's oceans have nurtured giants far beyond our ken, places where sunken mountain ranges and hidden trenches offer sanctuary. The world we know is but a shallow veneer atop profound depths, and in those depths may still dwell echoes of a prehistoric reign. In imagining Megalodon's return, we glimpse the ocean as boundless capacity for wonder and its eternal readiness to surprise us with monstrous shapes in the dark. Before assessing how Megalodon might still stalk modern seas, it's vital to understand the sheer scale that earned it the title of apex superpredator. Unlike any shark today, Carcharodoc's Megalodon wasn't just simply big. It redefined what big meant in marine terms. Estimates based on fossil teeth and vertebrae place its length between 14 and 18 meters on average, with some individuals possibly reaching near 20 meters. By comparison, the largest great white sharks today rarely exceed 6 meters. That means Megalodon was more than twice or even 3 times the length of our ocean's living hunting powerhouse, straddling the boundary between fish and myth. Reconstructing such a colossal creature relies on 2 primary clues: fossilized teeth and vertebral centra. Megalodon teeth, triangular and serrated, can measure up to 18 centimeters from tip to root. Scientists correlate these dimensions with modern lamnid sharks, whose teeth follow predictable size, to length ratios to arrive at the giant's full body length. Vertebral centra, the disc-like bones at the core of a shark's spine, similarly scale with overall size. The largest centra attributed to Megalodon exceed 25 centimeters in diameter. When plugged into formulas derived from living shark anatomy, these measurements converge on lengths approaching 20 meters. Length alone doesn't convey the animal's mass. Body mass estimates use volumetric scaling, comparing Megalodon's presumed girth to that of modern analogs. A great white's mass at 6 meters may average 2.5 tons. Scale that mass by the cube of length, and a 15-meter megalodon could tip the scales at 50 to 70 tons or more. Even conservative models place adult females at over 50 tons, rivaling smaller baleen whales in mass. That weight, combined with a hydrodynamic, torpedo-shaped body, made Megalodon an engine of immense power and momentum. Key to that momentum was its powerful tail, or caudal fin. Fin spans estimated from vertebral spacing and muscle attachment scars on fossilized skeletons suggest a tail width near 3 meters. Modern sharks leverage crescent-shaped tail fins for propulsion, converting muscle contraction into thrust. Megalodon's larger fin area would have enabled quick bursts of speed up to 20 to 30 kilometers per hour, sufficient to ambush slower, less maneuverable prey like early baleen whales. During attacks, it likely used powerful tail sweeps to position itself for a decisive bite, rather than pursuing long chases. The jaws of Megalodon were masterpieces of engineering. A 4-meter wide gape could swallow a small car or, more pertinently, sever the limbs of a whale. Jaw musculature and cartilage spacing inferred from jaw fossil impressions indicate engagement of massive adductor muscles, delivering bite forces upwards of 100,000 newtons. In comparison, the bite force of a modern great white hovers around 18,000 newtons. Megalodon's jaws could shear through whale ribs and crush vertebrae in one crushing blow, incapacitating prey almost instantly. Teeth formed the primary offensive tools. Each triangular crown bore serrations' tiny saw-like edges that cut flesh with efficiency. Row upon row of replacement teeth sat ready behind the functioning set, amounting to as many as 276 teeth in a mouth at once. When one tooth broke, another rotated into place, ensuring Megalodon never lost its cutting edge. Fossil discoveries of clusters of shed teeth suggest that a single shark might have replaced tens of thousands of teeth over its lifetime, each one a record of feeding events on a planetary scale. Supporting that massive head and tail required a robust internal framework. Unlike bony fish, sharks possess cartilage, making their skeletons lighter yet flexible. Megalodon's vertebral centra calcified to support enormous loads were stacked like reinforced discs along the spine. Muscles anchored to these centra transmitted force along the body's length, enabling the sinusoidal swimming strokes characteristic of sharks. The interplay of light cartilage and localized calcification allowed Megalodon to maintain both strength and buoyancy, maximizing energy efficiency. Internally, buoyancy control depended heavily on an enormous liver, likely constituting up to 30% of body weight. Packed with low-density oils and squalene, this organ served as an internal float, counteracting the shark's negative density. In modern lamnids, the liver's oil content fuels metabolism during long migrations. Megalodon's liver, at several tons in weight, would have provided continuous energy reserves to sustain its colossal frame between feeding events. Such reserves were crucial during breeding seasons, or when prey migrated through colder, less productive waters. Sensory systems scaled to match body size. Megalodon's olfactory bulbs, situated in an expansive rostral region, would have been proportionally larger than in modern sharks, granting an acute sense of smell. A single drop of blood dispersed in the water could signal feeding opportunities across several kilometers. Ampulla of Lorenzini electroreceptive canals embedded in the snout would detect faint electrical fields generated by muscle movements of prey at close range, enabling surprise attacks in low-light conditions. Vision also played a role in hunting. Retinal adaptations for low-light performance, inferred from related species, suggest a tapetum lucidum, a reflective layer enhancing photon capture expanded to maximize sensitivity. Pupils as wide as 20 centimeters across would gather scarce light in dawn, dusk, and twilight hours. Such adaptations allowed Megalodon to stalk prey in mesopelagic zones, following whale migrations into deeper water when necessary. Physiology and thermal regulation likewise accompany gigantism. Modern great whites possess a reedy, mirabile countercurrent heat exchangers in the body musculature to maintain elevated core temperatures in cold, deep waters. Megalodon likely possessed an even more elaborate network of vessels, preserving heat generated by sustained swimming. This adaptation enabled it to operate in a broad thermal range, from warm equatorial seas to temperate feeding grounds, following whale populations across latitudes. Life history patterns would echo those of modern large sharks. Megalodon was likely ovoviviparous, birthing live young after internal egg development. Modern great whites birth litters of up to 12 4-meter pups. Scaled to Megalodon size, pups may have measured 3 to 4 meters at birth. Nursery grounds, shallow coastal bays, would shelter juveniles until their size deterred adult megalodons and other predators. Sites analogous to today's shark nurseries in the Bahamas or South Africa could have hosted these young giants, which required significant prey biomass to sustain rapid early growth. Growth rates deduced from dentine deposition in fossil teeth indicate rapid juvenile growth designed to outrun predation risk. Thick, fast-growing dentine layers in early life suggest a growth of over a meter per year until reaching a length of 8 to 10 meters, after which growth slowed. Reaching sexual maturity likely required 15 to 20 years. Considering an estimated lifespan of up to 50 years, Megalodon's population turnover was slow, implying vulnerability to environmental changes and prey fluctuations. Megalodon's ecological role extended beyond individual hunts. As apex predator, it shaped marine communities through trophic cascades. Predation on juvenile cetaceans and pinnipeds regulated those populations, indirectly benefiting lower trophic level organisms. Scavenging of large carcasses redistributed nutrients across the pelagic zone and benthic floor, supporting deep-sea communities. Evidence of tooth marks on fossil whale bones indicates selective hunting patterns, targeting energy, rich blubber, and key skeletal elements, reflecting an ecological intelligence in prey selection. In recovering Megalodon's proportions, we also glimpse its cultural impact. Fossil teeth, revered by ancient peoples as tongues of dragons, show that humans long suspected these relics of once colossal beasts. In modern times, each new tooth find on beaches from the Carolinas to Morocco sparks wonder and debate, fueling documentaries, exhibitions, and fictional reimaginings. Megalodon endures not only as a scientific marvel, but as a symbol of nature's capacity for extremes, a creature whose dimensions challenge our sense of scale. The prospect of Megalodon's return compels us to confront these proportions once more. Modern sonar arrays would register echoes unlike any known species. Shipping routes might adapt to avoid potential ambush zones. Marine protected areas would need redesigning around presumed shark corridors. Sensors deployed in continental slopes could detect massive heat signatures. Baited cameras might record silhouettes so large they'd redefine deep-sea video standards. Such findings would revolutionize ocean science, validating the ocean's capacity to conceal giants even today. Long before humans ventured into kayaks and blenders churned smoothies from plankton, the deep blue was ruled by a predator unlike any we know today. Cartrochol's Megalodon did not merely brush past the largest whales of its time. It actively hunted them, shaping the evolution of marine mammals and carving massive holes in ancient food webs. Examining how Megalodon preyed on whales and dolphins reveals not only the shark's hunting strategies, but also offers a thought experiment. If that apex predator returned now, it would upend modern marine ecosystems in ways we can scarcely imagine. Fossil evidence provides the first clues. Paleontologists have unearthed whale bones riddled with bite marks that match the size and serration pattern of Megalodon teeth. In North Carolina's phosphate pits, fossilized skeletons of prehistoric baleen whales bear parallel gouges along their ribs and vertebrae. each gouge 3 to 4 centimeters deep. Tooth crowns, 20-centimeter triangular blades left V-shaped wounds, sometimes 2 inches wide at the base. These wounds often occur near the whale's midsection, suggesting that Megalodon targeted the richest source of blubber and soft tissue, rather than attacking tail flukes or dorsal fins. Closer study of these bite marks reveals a distinctive hunting style. Unlike great white sharks, which often stalk from below and latch on to prey before thrashing to tear off chunks of flesh, Megalodon seems to have employed a more surgical strike. The shark likely used its massive pectoral fins to pin a whale, then delivered a single, crushing bite aimed at severing the ribs or shattering the pectoral girdle. Once immobilized, the whale would sink slowly, allowing Megalodon to feed undisturbed on a floating carcass. In some fossil chambers, paleontologists have found clusters of teeth arranged in semicircles around a skull, indicating that multiple feeding events occurred at the same spot, scavenging on whale remains for days. But Megalodon's diet was not restricted to baleen whales. Early toothed whales, archaeocetes, and small odontocetes also figure prominently in the fossil record. Teeth from dolphins and porpoise-sized ancestors show puncture wounds consistent with smaller juvenile megalodons honing their predatory skills. In Pisco Formation deposits in Peru, fossil beds contain a mix of fish bones, dolphin vertebrae, and scattered megalodon teeth, suggesting opportunistic feeding on a variety of marine mammals. Juvenile sharks, measuring around 6 meters, likely practiced inshore ambush tactics, driving schools of dolphins into trapped coves and snapping up individual animals until their size forced them offshore. These feeding behaviors imply a complex predator-prey arms race. As whales grew larger and more maneuverable, Megalodon evolved broader skulls and more powerful jaws. Baleen whales developed thicker blubber layers and more streamlined bodies, perhaps as a response to predation pressure. The evolution of defensive pod behaviors, grouping in tight circles to fend off attackers, may have originated in response to the threat of a swimming juggernaut twice their maximum speed and armed with a bite force exceeding 100,000 newtons. Essentially, Megalodon shaped the social and anatomical adaptations of early whales and dolphins in ways that ripple through marine mammal evolution. Fast forward to the modern ocean. Today's top marine predator, the killer whale, employs complex group tactics to take down seals and even large baleen whales. Imagine that, instead of a pod of orcas working in concert, you have a solitary predator the size of a bus that can sense the electrical pulses of a 10-meter whale calf from hundreds of meters away. How would that change cetacean behavior? Whales might seek refuge in deeper, narrower canyons where Megalodon's massive girth prevents easy maneuvering. Breeding grounds near coasts could become death traps, forcing mothers to nurse calves in open water where the shark has less cover and fewer ambush opportunities. Fisheries would feel the impact almost immediately. Trawlers targeting tuna and swordfish in the mesopelagic zone would encounter massive sonar echoes, slow-moving arches that vanish just beyond the net's sweep. Dorsal fins glimpsed at the surface, 3 times larger than any great whites, would trigger moratoria on fishing zones, lest nets become shredded and crews endangered. Regulations might enforce strict vessel speeds and acoustic deterrent systems, yet no deterrent exists for a predator of such size and sensory acuity. Its ampulla of Lorenzini could detect the faintest vibrations from hundreds of meters away, making stealthy approaches impossible. Whale watching industries, once burgeoning with tourists eager to glimpse humpbacks and orcas, could face new guidelines. Boats trailing behind a pod of migrating gray whales would risk encountering a bristling ridge of megalodon teeth beneath the waterline. Sightings of floating carcasses victims of a shark's speed and precision would become grim reminders that apex predation still dominates ocean dynamics. Researchers instrumenting whales with satellite tags might retrofit tags with real-time bite detectors, sensors that trigger distress signals if jaw pressure exceeding known thresholds is applied. In ecological terms, reintroducing Megalodon would create cascading trophic effects. Whales, the keystone species of modern oceans, fertilize surface waters with iron-rich fecal plumes that fuel phytoplankton blooms. Fewer whales would mean reduced primary productivity, weakening food sources across the entire marine web. Fish populations from sardines to cod would dwindle as the base of the food chain erodes. Seabirds, reliant on small fish concentrated near upwelling zones, would suffer abrupt declines. In short, the shark's voracious appetite could collapse trophic webs built over millions of years since its extinction. Yet some organisms might capitalize on the shift. Deep-sea scavengers, such as hagfish and amphipods, would benefit from large, infrequent carcasses sinking to the abyssal plain. Marine microbes specializing in breaking down fatty whale tissue would proliferate. Biogeochemists might record spikes in organic carbon deposition in sediment cores, marking the return of a predator that churned the oceans like no other. Over geological timescales, these nutrient pulses could alter sediment composition, leaving stratigraphic signatures distinguishable from those of modern ecosystems. Behavioral adaptations would also emerge among smaller sharks. Great whites and makos, once occupying mid-level predator niches, would need to navigate the presence of a far larger rival. Juvenile salmon sharks in Alaskan waters would shift their seasonal patterns, avoiding known migratory corridors of Megalodon during pupping seasons. Tagging data would show altered movement paths, with sharks favoring deeper, cooler waters where a warm-blooded giant might struggle more. Niche partitioning once theorized for modern sharks, in the absence of larger competitors, would become stark, dividing the ocean into zones dominated by different sizes of predatory fish. Even marine mammals might form novel alliances. Dolphins, known for complex social intelligence, could collaborate with orcapods in defensive symbiosis, driving off or distracting Megalodon in exchange for cleaning and collision warning services. One can envision a coalition. Slender, agile dolphins swirling around the shark's snout to impair its vision, while killer whales target a single flank, using acoustic clicks to disorient it. Such interspecies teamwork would approach the apex collaborative strategies of terrestrial pack hunters, a behavior evolving in modern oceans to mitigate the return of a prehistoric predator. Technology would evolve in response. Autonomous glider networks profiling temperature, salinity, and acoustics would incorporate Megalodon models to predict presence based on environmental cues, water temperature gradients, prey density forecasts, and even geomagnetic anomalies. Research vessels might deploy deep water acoustic buoys, broadcasting high-frequency clicks that deter shark approaches, akin to modern seal scarers. Advanced ROVs outfitted with powerful low-light cameras would scan continental slopes, searching for shadows that match the shark's massive profile. In effect, an arms race between predator and human technology would unfold beneath the waves. On the conservation front, reopening the possibility of a surviving Megalodon would stir debates. Marine protected areas, MPAs, established to safeguard endangered whales and other megafauna, would face paradoxical goals: protect both predator and prey. Fishing quotas might tighten to ensure sufficient food for both whales and giant sharks. Debates over culling currently considered unthinkable for sharks would resurface under the specter of a species capable of decimating whale populations. International conventions like CITES would struggle with a living fossil that predates all existing wildlife laws. Beyond the direct ecological and technological impacts, Megalodon's return would reshape cultural perceptions of the ocean. The psychological effect of sharing the seas with a predator twice the length of a bus would recalibrate human notions of safety, inspiring reverence or terror for the ocean's power. Literature and film would refocus from the relatively small great white to an even more colossal threat. Tourism slogans would warn, "Only the brave dive below," while merchandise would feature the iconic serrated tooth, a reminder that the ocean's shadows conceal more than fish. Yet the same primal allure would attract explorers, scientists, and thrill seekers. Citizen scientists might crowdsource shotgunned hydrophone recordings, triangulating possible megalodon sounds, slow, deep grumbles that traveling whales cannot produce. Submersible tours could offer shadow watching, brief glimpses of fins reminiscent of Jurassic monsters, all streamed live to shore-based audiences. Virtual reality experiences would reconstruct prehistoric oceans, letting people swim alongside digital ghosts of megalodon, stalking whales in warm Miocene seas. Ultimately, the story of megalodon preying on whales and dolphins is more than a paleontological curiosity. It's a cautionary tale and a call to wonder. It reminds us that apex predators shape ecosystems in profound ways, and that the disappearance or reappearance of a single species can reverberate through food chains, biogeochemical cycles, and human cultures. Imagining Megalodon's return forces us to confront the fragility of modern marine systems and the hidden depths of oceanic mystery still awaiting discovery. In the hunter's wake, we see both the power of nature as design and the delicate balance that sustains life in Earth as final frontier. Along the continental shelves where today's surfers chase waves and families wade in ankle-deep water, Megalodon would feel perfectly at home. Fossil evidence shows that Carcharodon's Megalodon once patrolled nearshore environments, hunting whales in shallow seas and giving birth in protected bays. Unlike modern great white sharks, which venture inshore but favor cooler waters, Megalodon thrived in warm, nutrient-rich coastal zones. Its nursery grounds, warm, sheltered lagoons with plenty of food for growing pups, would have lined every tropical and subtropical coastline. In our modern oceans, these same areas host marinas, resorts, and beaches where millions of people swim, snorkel, and sail. If Megalodon still roamed, beach culture as we know it would vanish beneath warning flags and razor wire netting. Paleontologists infer from fossil teeth found in nearshore deposits that Megalodon targeted juvenile whales close to shore. The shallow waters of Miocene coastlines, some up to 100 meters deep, offered ideal ambush corridors. Today, continental shelves of comparable depth stretch for kilometers off Florida, the Caribbean, West Africa, and Southeast Asia. In these zones, whale calves learn to swim and navigate under the watchful eyes of mothers. A megalodon patrolling 5 to 10 kilometers offshore could easily intercept a whale pod breaking from deep water roots. In a world with surviving megalodons, coastal whale watching would become a hazardous pursuit, requiring silent approaches by drone or submersible rather than open-deck tour boats. Recreational diving sites, coral reefs, wrecks, and underwater caves would be outlawed or heavily restricted in many regions. Divers exploring ancient reefs in the Red Sea or the Great Barrier Reef would risk encountering Megalodon in their own domains. Unlike smaller reef sharks, which pose minimal threat, a single flash of a giant triangular dorsal fin near a dive cage would trigger evacuation alarms. Dive operators would invest in retractable steel cages and high-frequency acoustic repellers. Governments might require mandatory tagging and transponder bracelets for safe passages. The cost of these modifications would price common tourists out of many dive destinations. Commercial and artisanal fisheries would suffer dramatic declines. Trawl nets set on continental slopes for tuna and swordfish would encounter tooth-ripped mesh or vanish entirely. Gill nets stretched across shallow canyons might bear the imprint of massive jaws. Fishermen in small boats, halibut traps in the North Atlantic, or snapper lines in the Pacific would face the risk of capsizing by tail slaps that can create waves over 2 meters high. Insurance premiums for fishing vessels would skyrocket. Coastal governments might impose exclusion zones, no-go areas, for all but licensed research vessels. The daily catch could drop by 20 to 40% in historically productive corridors. Coastal shipping lanes would require rerouting to avoid megalodon hotspots. Container ships and tankers traveling near continental shelves would install shark-safe hull coatings designed to discourage bites. Military sonar arrays already track submarines. In a Megalodon world, navies would adapt those arrays to broadcast deterrent signals at frequencies repulsive to sharks. Port entries near estuaries, Chesapeake Bay, Tokyo Bay, the St. Lawrence, would have floating electric barriers extending 2 kilometers offshore. Recreational boaters would need real-time alerts on their chart plotters indicating recent Megalodon activity, similar to modern IS vessel collision warnings. Beaches would become militarized zones. High tide lines would be marked not with just warning flags, but with sensor buoys and scanning drones. Coastal municipalities would deploy shark spotter teams armed with thermal cameras mounted on towers, scanning for dark silhouettes under the waves. Evacuation sirens might sound at the first sign of a 3-meter-long dorsal fin cutting through sunset light. Public beaches might operate on timed sessions, 1 hour open, 1 hour closed, for alternating cleanup and scanning. Tourists would navigate beachside boardwalks behind reinforced glass walls rather than strolling on open sand. Beyond tourism, coastal real estate values would plummet in traditional vacation areas. Oceanfront condos and seaside villas would require shark-proof nets extending 200 meters into the water before property developers could sell units with waterfront views. Insurance policies would penalize owners who did not invest in barrier maintenance. Luxury resorts might relocate inland or retrofit private lagoon pools with shark-proof filtration systems. Air-conditioned beaches, man-made lagoons pumping filtered water would replace open ocean access, giving rise to secure, shark-safe leisure bubbles. Offshore wind farm platforms and oil rigs would become surveillance stations. Turbine tops and derrick platforms would host hydrophones and baited camera traps, monitoring deep currents for Megalodon passage. Energy companies would partner with marine biologists to map shark corridors and adjust turbine rotations to minimize acoustic disturbance. In emergencies, an unexpected 16-meter silhouette caught on sonar platform workers would don emergency flotation suits and depart by helicopter. Regulatory bodies would require contingency plans for predator encounters, driving up operational costs. Even the simplest coastal activities, kayaking, paddleboarding, snorkeling, would change profoundly. Maritime authorities might require participants to carry small, acoustic pingers emitting high-frequency bursts, harmless to humans, but intolerable to large sharks. Final approvals for water sports events would come from an independent shark risk assessor, akin to modern weather forecasters. Schools teaching children to swim would hold classes in enclosed pools behind reinforced glass walls, while lifeguards kept real-time tabs on offshore sensors for any movement beyond 3 kilometers. Fishing competitions, billfish tournaments, bass derbies would face new restrictions. Prize-winning trophy marlin could no longer be landed without support vessels poised to deter Megalodon. Large winner's blue marlin, weighing over 200 kilograms, would be reeled and under escort, lest their thrashing blood trail attract a giant predator. Competitors would use synthetic lures scented with pheromone blockers to mask chemical traces of bleeding fish. Regulatory bodies would enforce stringent catch and release protocols, requiring rapid hook removal to minimize bloodshed. Maritime archaeology and underwater film crews would require armed escorts and decoy drones, documenting ancient shipwrecks on the continental shelf Spanish galleons. World War II U-boats would involve first deploying robotic bait dummies to distract any nearby Megalodon. Live-streamed footage capturing relics would show iron-studded wreckage flickering past a Megalodon-sized shadow. The real conservationists trading in footage for scientific clues rather than tourism. Film crews would risk remote operations on wheeled submersibles rather than manned dives. Coastal defense strategies would evolve beyond counterterrorism to include marine megafauna incidents. Naval patrols might carry non-lethal electromagnetic nets, designed to create fields dissuading Megalodon approaches. Surveillance drones would shadow known whale migration corridors, relaying data on large-scale movements. City councils in limestone karst archipelagos Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, would coordinate cross-border task forces to track Megalodon sightings, replicating modern search and rescue frameworks, but on a much larger scale. Local lore and coastal culture would adapt. Fishermen's wharves, from Maine to Mozambique, would display protective talismans and share Megalodon sighting maps instead of weather charts. Coastal festivals would include Megalodon remembrance ceremonies, honoring mythical ancestors who tamed the seas. Legends of men swallowed whole by ancient giants would blend with modern cautionary tales of boat engines failing near deep trench perimeters. Coastal communities would hold annual blackout drills, simulating mass beach evacuations at sunset. Scientific expeditions would race to tag and track Megalodon. Satellite-linked dorsal tags, designed to withstand bites that fracture shark jaws, would relay data on depth, water temperature, and prey density. Genetic sampling via biopsy darts would reveal population sizes and nursery ground locations. Such research would require lengthy permits, special vessels, and the world's most experienced shark handlers. Publications in journals like Marine Mammal Science and Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology would be dominated by articles on Megalodon-human interfaces. Governments would convene international summits to draft high seas predator management treaties. Coastal states would negotiate quotas, nursery ground protections, and rescue protocol cooperation. Ports from Lisbon to Cape Town would jointly monitor transit corridors, coordinating sonar arrays and data linking coastal radar to early warning systems. The United Nations might establish a Megalodon Management Commission under the Convention on Migratory Species, with special advisors from marine biology, fisheries, and emergency management. Under these circumstances, traditional coastal communities, fishing villages, and island settlements would adapt through hybrid economies. Locals might trade Megalodon tourism for baited remote camera sponsorships, offering live feed views in exchange for funding. They would lead safe shore bird watching and tide pool exploration tours, shifting emphasis from water to land resources. Sustainable aquaculture on land fish farms would boom to replace wild-caught seafood lost to predation and nets rendered ineffective by tooth-ripped mesh. Educational curricula would include coastal predator awareness from elementary through high school. Students might simulate Megalodon-proof boat designs in STEM contests or map historical Megalodon tooth finds to predict potential modern habitats. University marine science departments would open new chairs in gigantic marine predator ecology, offering fieldwork opportunities in submersibles and research station internships at remote atolls. From an economic standpoint, coastal property values would diverge sharply. Prime waterfront homes with small private beaches would rebrand as inner lagoon estates, properties set behind extensive barrier reefs or artificial brackish. Marshes designed as protective moats. High-end resort developers would pivot to landlocked luxury retreats, bundling beachfront access with secured tunnels beneath shark-resistant steel. Coastal insurance companies would underwrite specialized Megalodon hazard clauses, covering only properties outside exclusion zones. In scientific terms, redefining the coastline as an active Megalodon habitat would transform oceanography. Bathymetric mapping would expand to include roaming zones where predator presence influences coastal fluxes. Biological surveys would track changes in larval fish settlement near nursery bays. Marine mammal rescue teams would reorient from occasional beach strandings to frequent pod distress calls, deploying inflatable booms to herd small dolphins away from known shark corridors. Culturally, the mythos of the ocean as a benign recreational landscape would shatter. Beachwear magazines would publish cautionary tales, advising sunbathers to avoid dawn and dusk near open water. Surfer competitions might relocate to inland wave pools. Coastal architects would design houses on reinforced stilts, akin to Pennsylvania's sugar sand pilings, preventing a megalodon from reaching ground floors in rare nearshore forays. Yet even in the face of these transformations, humans would adapt. Coastal residents might develop new rituals like megalodon watch gatherings, community-wide sonar listening events, and forge deeper bonds with the ocean's rhythms. Architects would pioneer living breakwaters, combining oyster reefs, mangrove plantings, and underwater sculptures that confuse sonar and provide refuge for small fish away from predator patrols. Schools might teach megalodon signals in surf movies, training swimmers to interpret wave patterns that hint at large body movement offshore. As digital connectivity integrates coastlines, mobile apps would alert users. High megalodon risk spotted 2 kilometers offshore, avoid surf zone until further notice. Smartwatches might pair with acoustic detectors, vibrating on the wrist when low-frequency rumbles indicate a nearby giant. Community text networks similar to Amber Alerts could disseminate sightings in real time, turning entire beaches into watchful sentinels. In this reimagined world, the ocean's edge ceases to be the carefree boundary of land and sea. It becomes a living frontier, one where technology, policy, culture, and courage converge to manage coexistence with a predator that dwarfs our greatest ships and shatters our sense of security. Human ingenuity would scramble to adapt. Shark-safe infrastructure, real-time detection networks, regulated coastal zones, each an attempt to impose order on a realm fundamentally unchanged since Megalodon's reign. Ultimately, the specter of Megalodon stalking our shorelines force-feeds us a crucial lesson. Earth's oceans are not ours to master. Their depths still harbor leviathans beyond our imagining, ecosystems sculpted by predation long before human recreation began. If that ancient predator still lurked near our beaches, our modern way of life, surfing, swimming, fishing, sailing, would become a calculated balance between fear and fascination. Coastlines would be declared both playgrounds and exclusion zones, where the chance to glimpse a living legend would come wrapped in the unmistakable truth that, even after millions of years, some giants have never truly gone extinct. A low, rolling thrum vibrates through the hull as a container ship plows along the continental shelf, miles from land. On the bridge, officers peer at radar screens flickering with echoes of fishing vessels and passing tankers. Nothing unusual, until the sonar technician leans forward, eyes widening at a colossal shadow moving against the grain of expected traffic. The sonar return is immense, far larger than any whale recorded in these routes. Before the officer can respond, the ship's hull shudders from side to side, a muted concussion like a distant explosion. Moments later, steel groans echo in the engine room as a massive body brushes against the hull, sending tremors through bulkheads. No storm rages here, no collision with another vessel. This is the heft of an ancient predator returning to a sea it once ruled. Most fishing boats today are designed to withstand storms, not shark bites. A typical 12-meter trawler with a steel hull less than a centimeter thick is vulnerable to far more than rough seas. In coastal waters, small-scale fishermen haul nets for tuna and swordfish, rarely fearing anything larger than the occasional pilot whale. But a megalodon's bite force over 100,000 newtons could shear through that thin plating like paper. Imagine a gill net strung between 2 boats, its mesh ripped ragged when a 15-meter jaw clamps down on the framework. A single tooth, serrated and thick as a softball bat, could puncture the hull below the waterline, flooding compartments within seconds, and overturning a vessel that once felt secure in familiar fishing grounds. When larger trawlers venture farther offshore, they still hug the continental slope at depths of 200 to 600 meters. Their steel plating, typically 10 to 15 millimeters thick, resists the occasional stray propeller strike or submerged debris. But Megalodon's teeth root to tip up to 18 centimeters in length could wedge into the hull like heavy chisels. A focused bite at the bow could rupture fuel tanks, sending slicks across the water. Crewmen scrambling to deploy lifeboats would be struggling against a rising swell. Tail slaps from such a massive shark disturbed the water column, generating waves up to 2 meters high at close range. In open seas, those waves roll into vulnerable low freeboard decks, swamping engines and rendering lifeboats unusable. Submarines, the silent sentinels of naval fleets, would find no sanctuary at depth. Modern attack submarines operate at depths exceeding 300 meters, with pressure hulls built from high-strength steel alloys, nearly 50 millimeters thick and reinforced by internal frames. Yet these vessels are not invulnerable. A Megalodon could cruise along the thermocline, brushing against the outer hull planking and deforming it in a localized impact. The sonar signature of a submarine, suddenly wobbling out of mapward depth readings, would trigger alarms, even as the shark's mouth clamps onto the hull's outer casing. A single puncture near a ballast tank could flood a compartment, compromising buoyancy control and forcing an emergency surfacing, exactly the high-risk scenario naval commanders dread. Even rigid-hull inflatable boat skiffs under 6 meters long used for special operations would be powerless against a sudden Megalodon breach. These boats rely on buoyancy tubes and modest outboard motors. They lack any protective armor. A surprise appearance of a giant shark beneath the hull would lift one side, roach the craft, and send occupants tumbling into the churning depths. Their distress calls, sent as panicked bursts of VHF static, might reach shore stations too late. By the time rescue vessels crossed the horizon, the shark's silhouette would vanish into the blue gloom. Shipping containers stacked on the decks of Panamax vessels might protect cargo, but not human lives below deck. In a worst-case scenario, a Megalodon surfacing under a ship's starboard side could upset ballast balance, tilting the ship several degrees and flooding lower decks. Modern bulk carriers use ballast systems, designed to level the ship when cargo is uneven, but those systems move thousands of tons of seawater in response to trend changes. Minutes without correction are enough to take on fatal amounts of water. A sudden flooding event in a cargo hold could compromise structural integrity, leading to catastrophic hull failure. Ocean liners, the grand vessels that carry thousands of passengers, boast hull thicknesses up to 30 millimeters and multiple watertight compartments. Yet a large shark gripping the bow near the bulbous bow, where the hull's curvature naturally concentrates force, could tear through plating and dislodge weld seams. Once seawater floods the forward compartments, the ship's automatic trim system kicks in, but even a 2-degree list can send frightened passengers to lifeboat drills. The perception alone of a Megalodon-sized creature nibbling at the hull would spark panic, leading to unsafe evacuations and loss of life in the confusion. Modern merchant vessels rely on eyes transponders and eyes-equipped lifeboats for safety. But none of this technology anticipates a predator lurking at depth. Crew safety protocols might require refraining from deck work after dusk, when a shark silhouette stands out more clearly under deck lights. Escorts of factory trawlers by Coast Guard cutters would be standard procedure in known Megalodon corridors. Yet those cutters would need thicker hull plating and deeper sonar nets to deter a colossal attacker. Even unmanned vessels, oceanographic gliders, and autonomous surface drones would fall prey. Their design prioritizes lightweight and long battery life. Hulls of composite materials stand little chance against a massive bite. A Megalodon sampling a buoy's mooring line out of curiosity would pull the line taut, snapping it and sending instruments plunging into reefs. Calibration buoys set to monitor water temperature and salinity could be destroyed, leaving gaps in oceanographic data crucial for weather forecasting and climate modeling. Offshore oil platforms, fixed to the seabed by steel piles and concrete, might seem secure, but infrastructures built to withstand storms do not account for shark bites. Drilling risers, The pipes that connect the seabed wellheads to the platform are made of steel sections welded together and coated for corrosion resistance. A keenly aimed chomp from a giant shark could abrade protective coatings, expose weld seams, and compromise blowout preventers. An unexpected breach might release hydrocarbons at depth, a spill triggered not by mechanical failure, but by biological force. Naval minesweepers and survey ships mapping undersea cables would require new risk assessments. Plowing seafloor cables with remote-controlled vehicles might latch a shark's attention. Battered control cables embedded in sand for protection would be vulnerable to a curious shark biting through substrate. Repair missions already costly and time-consuming would spike as Megalodon interactions become common, demanding specialized cable armoring and rope-like sheaths resistant to tooth stress. Major port entries Singapore, Rotterdam, San Francisco would install shark-proof barriers extending hundreds of meters offshore. These barriers, similar to those tested on popular Australian beaches, would consist of steel mesh framed by concrete anchors and connected to acoustic deterrent nodes. Ships entering port would navigate narrow corridors, funneling through protective gates. Pilots guiding large vessels would rely on sonar overlays showing shark clearance zones where no predator echo returns are detected. Containers would be unloaded under escort by patrol boats equipped with underwater drones emitting high-frequency pulses that deter large sharks. Economically, insurance underwriters would consider Megalodon a named peril, the same as war or nuclear attack. Hull and machinery premiums for vessels operating in shark territory would double or triple. Ship owners in the Gulf of Mexico or off the coast of Brazil, where prehistoric Megalodon fossils date to Miocene nearshore deposits, might avoid routes risking predator encounters, rerouting through deeper waters or scheduling night transits to minimize surface exposure. Shipping giants could pass increased fuel costs to consumers, inflating the price of goods transported across these predator belts. Naval architects would design shark-hardened hulls double-layered, plating separated by polymer energy-absorbing materials. Similar to ballistic armor, these composite walls would distribute bite forces across a broader area. Propulsion lines would be sheathed in flexible, abrasion-resistant tubing. Sea chest intakes, normally screened by metal grates, would be relocated deeper within the hull, beyond the shark's reach. Emergency blow-hard blow valves on ballast tanks would prevent flooding if minor hull breaches occurred. Yet these changes come at cost in increased weight and reduced cargo capacity trade-offs. Shipping companies would grudgingly accept in shark-infested waters. Port state control inspections would include shark readiness assessments. International load line regulations might incorporate shark deterrent measures as part of safety certificates. Ports without adequate protective barriers could be denied entry to vessels flagged in high-risk regions. Coastal states would negotiate bilateral agreements for sharing sonar data and predator warnings. Unified alert systems, akin to the global maritime distress and safety system, would broadcast Megalodon advisories, telling mariners which grids show increased predator activity. On the highest end, ocean liners might replace open promenade decks with enclosed observation concourses behind thick laminated glass. Glass fiber reinforced plastic GFRP barriers at the waterline would deflect curious noses away from hull plating. In-cabin entertainment screens would show fins passing by windows like living history museums rather than leisure cruises. Passengers would marvel at the scale of a 4-meter dorsal fin casting a shadow on the turquoise shallows, a luxury thrill packaged in safety zones behind steel mesh. For smaller craft sailboats and yachts, a new generation of shark-safe designs would emerge. Lower hulls of carbon composite yachts would integrate gel coat sheathing infused with shark-repellent compounds, tested to disrupt chemoreception in large chondrichians. Keel bulbs, once streamlined for hydrodynamic advantage, would swell to become deterrent masses that make the vessel appear larger. Decks would feature rapid deploy riot nets, droppable circumferential barriers that pop open at the first sign of a predatory shadow. Boarding ladders would retract at the simple push of a button, preventing easy exit from the water. Settled coasts, resorts, and marinas would face an existential question. Can life go on as before? Some may adapt by building inland lagoons, artificial coves, fed by filtered seawater, where netted boundaries protect swimmers. Others might embrace shark diving as a new attraction, offering customers secure cages to view Megalodon from a safe distance, while marine biologists tag and monitor visible individuals. Safety protocols for these experiences would be as stringent as cage dives for great whites, but scaled to accommodate greater bite forces and thrashing potential. Even so, Mother Nature always has the final say. In heavy seas, sonar and nets become useless. A rogue wave could snap deterrent cables, leaving nets to drift and sag. A hungry Megalodon might slip beneath a floating barrier, drawn by the rich aromas of whale carcasses used in research baiting. No barrier is impenetrable if the predator chooses to ruin it. In concluding this grim vision, it becomes clear that shipping, fishing, tourism, and naval operations would face unprecedented challenges. The ocean's surface, once considered a blank line between land and sea, would become an active battleground, where humanity's need for safe passage intersects with nature's largest ambusher. Megalodon's return would demand that we reinvent everything from hull design to port infrastructure, from maritime law to coastal culture. No vessel, no matter how large or well-armored, could ever feel fully invulnerable. The sea would remind us, as it always has, that we are guests in a realm far older and more powerful than any technology we can muster. And so, for today's ships and sailors, the ocean would never again be safe. Coastal towns that once thrived on sunlit beaches and gentle surf would awaken to a new reality, the ocean not as a playground, but as a potential staging ground for the greatest predator Earth has ever known. Local governments would move quickly to reassess every stretch of sand that was once public domain. Lifeguard towers, once unmanned and only lightly staffed, would become fortified observation posts, bristling with thermal cameras and sonar buoys. Warning signs in half a dozen languages would line the boardwalks, declaring the immediate presence of a megatoothed shark whose silhouette could appear just beyond the break. Beach closures would become an almost daily occurrence. A passing pod of dolphins glimpsed from shore now, a potential teaser for a hunting. Megalodon would trigger an alert system that raises red flags and activates megaphone announcements. Families headed for a day in the surf would be rerouted to inland water parks or gated, shark-proof rock pools carved from the hillside. Seasonal beach festivals, previously brimming with sandcastle contests and beachfront concerts, would be postponed or relocated into enclosed, onshore amphitheaters. The scent of sunscreen and salt air would give way to the hum of drones scanning offshore and the echo of sirens that warn swimmers away. Underwater tourism operators would face an existential crisis. Shark cage dives, once marketed around great whites, would quickly seem quaint in comparison to the threat of a 15-meter-long Megalodon. Dive companies might erect reinforced steel cages with multiple layers of interlocked bars and hydraulic shutters. Yet even these measures would be no guarantee of safety. Stories of shuddering steel and mangled cages ripped from frames by a single, powerful bite would circulate among the dive community. Insurance firms would refuse coverage above certain depths or distances from shore, forcing operators to cancel dive trips or demand exorbitant premiums that few customers could afford. Scuba instructors would pivot to virtual reality training sessions, teaching techniques for evasion and emergency ascent in simulated shark-infested waters. Certification courses would include modules on predator behavior, acoustic deterrent use, and silent buoyancy control to minimize the vibrations that attract large predators. Recreational dive shops would stock high-frequency pingers, devices emitting pulses that irritate a shark's electroreceptive senses. and personal strobe lights designed to disrupt the hunter's twilight attack. Yet no technology could replicate the false security of water uninhabited by giants. Snorkeling, once the most accessible form of ocean recreation, would all but disappear along hot-spot coastlines. Families paddling through waist-deep water would trade masks and fins for glass-bottomed boats, peering down at coral gardens from the relative safety of a reinforced hull. Tourist brochures would highlight nightly shark deterrent displays, underwater light shows meant to keep curious megalodons at bay rather than sunrise snorkeling tours. The change in marketing would reshape the entire identity of seaside destinations, shifting from carefree beach breaks to high-tech marine safaris. Coastal resorts would scramble to redesign pools to mimic the ocean experience while eliminating risk. Enormous lagoon pools with wave generators would rise in the center of resort grounds, surrounded by glass-faced enclosures that keep visitors offshore literally and figuratively. Poolside waiters on jet skis might deliver cocktails to floating rafts, while lifeguards monitor the slow dance of artificial waves. All signifiers of the sea-white sand, the sound of surf would be repurposed into simulacra, safe but soulless substitutes for the open water once taken for granted. Island economies built on water sports, windsurfing, kite surfing, jet boating would face collapse. Rental shops stacked with boards and skis, once bustling hubs, would empty as safety warnings proliferate. Event organizers of regattas and offshore powerboat races would suspend competitions, citing the unacceptable risk of vessel breach by a massive shark. Even paddleboard yoga and stand-up paddleboard tours, the gentlest of aquatic activities, would require participants to don protective neoprene shark socks and carry handheld acoustic disruptors. The romance of oceanfront fitness would vanish in the glare of predator avoidance measures. Fishing charters, once a cornerstone of coastal tourism, would be forced to reinvent themselves. Anglers trolling for tuna or marlin would see their lines cut by unseen teeth or watch lures vanish as a megalodon investigated the disturbance. To adapt, charters might offer shark photography trips, towing decoy lures behind unmanned rigs, while guests observe from the safety of sealed glass observation pods. The thrill of hooking a fish would be traded for the spectacle of a dorsal fin eclipsing the sun, an eerie reminder that the ultimate catch remains out of reach. Scenic boat tours along cliffs and sea caves would need reevaluation. Glass-bottom catamarans gliding over kelp forests would transform into bulletproof pontoon boats, reinforced by steel mesh and outfitted with emergency drop shields. Tourists hoping to glimpse seals lounging on rocks would instead peer through reinforced portholes, listening to onboard commentary about predator patterns rather than seabirds and marine mammals. Historical coastal narratives, stories of pirates, hidden coves, and lighthouse vistas would be reframed around survival strategies and the ever-present threat beneath the waves. Popular surfing breaks, once attracting hundreds on any given day, would empty. Legends of the perfect wave would collide with cautionary tales of nearly snagged boards and close calls with tooth-shaped dorsal fins. Surf schools might pivot to inland wave pools, complete with transparent side walls, severing human connection from the open ocean. Local surf shops, replaced by tactical outfitters selling shark-repellent patches and wave radiation suits, would lose their laid-back counterculture appeal. The stoke of riding a natural wave would be sacrificed to the safety of artificial surf. Marine parks and coastal reserves, once pristine havens for biodiversity, would transform into high-security zones. Rangers would patrol with remote-controlled underwater drones, equipped with strobe and sonic devices calibrated to deter large predators. Visitors to these parks would access underwater trails via sealed tunnels or submerged observation domes, akin to glass tunnels in aquariums. The authenticity of being immersed in nature would yield to the imperatives of coexisting with an awe-inspiring, yet deadly, ancient shark. Ecotourism operators, previously promoting swim with the dolphins encounters, would be compelled to offer dolphin conservation from afar programs. Guests might watch pods from elevated observation platforms accessible only by cable car, with the dolphin's aquatic grace displayed as one observes cheetahs on the Serengeti. The tension between wanting to immerse oneself in a living ecosystem and needing to maintain a buffer against an apex predator would redefine the very ethos of ecotourism. Even beachside rituals, sunset bonfires, tide pool exploration, twilight paddle would carry an undercurrent of fear. A leisurely moonlit walk along the water's edge, once a sentimental image of coastal romance, would prompt handheld sonar scans and tethered life vests. Wedding ceremonies on white sand beaches might be forced to shift inland or restrict the direction of the guest line to avoid the horizon on the water side. Photographers would retouch backgrounds to remove ominous shapes at the waterline, preserving the idyllic veneer while masking the truth beyond the frame. The thrill of danger that once underpinned activities like cliff jumping or coastal spelunking would be overshadowed by genuine hazards. Adventurers descending into sea caves at low tide would equip themselves with reinforced wetsuits and emergency extraction systems, mindful that a misjudged slip could plunge them into the jaws of prehistory. Coastal hikers traversing cliff-top trails might need sonar backpacks, alerting them to deep sea movement beneath their feet, a bizarre reversal where the land's edge becomes the high-risk zone. Local economies would forge new industries: protective mesh manufacturing, autonomous shark deterrent craft, immersive VR, ocean without Megalodon experiences. Schools of hospitality would train staff in megalo-friendly service, teaching everything from reading sonar readouts to demonstrating emergency submersion procedures. Gift shops would sell "I braved Megalodon waters" paraphernalia, the new badge of coastal bravado. Tourism slogans would pivot from "relax on our shores" to "dare to visit the edge of the deep." Yet some intrepid souls would still venture into the waters. Scientific researchers, armed with cutting-edge submersibles and long-endurance AUVs, would map nursery grounds and migratory paths. Documentary filmmakers would innovate new cage designs and deploy remote camera rigs baited with fatty whale tissue to capture rare glimpses of the giant predator. Their footage, streamed live to millions, would become the modern equivalent of big cat safaris, the ultimate proof that Earth still harbors living legends. In this brave new world, tourism would no longer be simply a matter of leisure. It would be an exercise in managed risk, a study in the boundaries between fascination and fear. The beaches we once took for granted, the hidden coves we explored on a whim, the turquoise shallows we swam in without a second thought, all would require rethinking, redesign, and restraint. Human presence would retreat behind glass and steel, trading open access for controlled observation. And every visit to the coast would serve as a reminder that nature's giants, though seemingly extinct, possess a timeless claim on the oceans we thought we mastered. The first glimmers of proof arrive in a flurry of satellite data. An anomalous sonar return off the continental shelf, moving too slowly and too large to be any known whale. Within hours, an international consortium of marine biologists is mobilized teams in Honolulu, Cape Town, and Vancouver, hustling to outfit research vessels with deep-sea submersibles, remote cameras, and genetic sampling gear. Paleontologists at coastal universities scramble to reclassify their laboratories for live captures rather than dusty fossils. Funding agencies, alerted by frantic grant proposals, clear emergency budgets to accelerate everything from autonomous drone deployments to molecular genetics core sequencing. On the deck of one of the first response ships, the National Oceanic Imaging Vessel Tyche, a cadre of scientists assembles around a large display screen, showing live feeds from an ROV crawling along the steep drop-off. Each sensor, each pixel of sonar, carries the weight of decades of paleontological assumption. Gone are the days when Megalodon existed only in tooth and bone. Now, scientists will glimpse living tissue muscle fibers, retina cells, even cartilage that has not felt the press of human hands for 3 million years. Within 24 hours of the initial ping, research teams form specialized divisions. The Marine Genomics Unit on board Tyche preps liquid nitrogen tanks for blast freezing tissue biopsies. A paleobiologist rigs a robotic jaw clamp to collect shed teeth fragments without injuring the animal. Oceanographers ready CTD casts, measures of conductivity, temperature, depth, to profile the water column's temperature, and salinity structure, looking for the thermal niche in which a giant predator could maintain its metabolism. In Hawaii, the Undersea Genetics Institute assembles a rapid response lab at Pearl Harbor. Boxes of sample vials, pipettes, and portable DNA sequencers arrive by courier. Researchers refine primers to target shark mitochondrial DNA, tailoring probes to differentiate living Megalodon sequences from closely related lamnid species. If successful, they hope to sequence the genome within days, an unprecedented acceleration compared to the years it once took to decode whale or crocodile genomes. Simultaneously, deep-sea technology firms team up with universities. A prototype bioacoustic array, normally used for submarine detection, is reconfigured to detect the low-frequency pulses of a 15-meter shark's heart beating at depth. Engineers embed seismic accelerometers into drifting buoys so subtle tail-slap vibrations register as they pass. Data flows through fiber optic cables to floating research platforms, converted oil rigs, no longer drilling for hydrocarbons, but serving as laboratories afloat. Paleontologists on shore pore over the huge museum collections of Megalodon teeth samples amassed over centuries from Miocene deposits around the world. They compare tooth histology under scanning electron microscopes, looking for minute wear patterns that reveal feeding behavior. Those wear striations are baseline data for reconstructing bite forces. Now, with live observation imminent, lab reports on fossil microwear can be tested against actual feeding events, bridging a 3-million-year gap between artifice and actuality. Mapping the shark's territory becomes urgent. Ocean drifters outfitted with LiDAR and sonar descend along predicted migratory corridors, relaying 3D bathymetric maps of canyons deeper than Everest is tall. These hidden valleys, largely uncharted even by Navy sonar, could serve as refuge zones where Megalodon calves grow in seclusion. Marine ecologists label these regions critical nursery grounds, racing to deploy ROVs before the shark samples them and potentially relocates. Tagging a living Megalodon presents the greatest challenge. A mobile tagging unit on the stern readies a custom harpoon dart attached to an 8-meter cable. The dart carries both satellite GPS and depth sensors. Success depends on an instantaneous strike and secure attachment to thick, dental armored skin. The first attempts fail. The shark's tail flicks the tag loose, sending the dart spinning off into the abyss. Onboard engineers scramble to redesign the dart's barbed anchoring system, embedding microelectrodes that sense cartilage rigidity before releasing bioadhesive clamps. Underwater acoustician teams test near ultrasonic nets to shape sonic fences around research vessels. The nets emit frequencies proven to disorient lamnids, hopefully discouraging the giant shark from closing within dangerous proximity. Yet any acoustic field strong enough to ward off a 50-ton predator also risks disrupting dolphin and whale communication, touching off ethical debates among the marine mammal specialists aboard. Environmental ethicists rush to mediate, crafting rapid guidelines to balance predator study with ecosystem health. As first live sightings filter to shore, science journalists descend on every coastal research station. Live panels debate tagging ethics and safety protocols. Graduate students prepare for months of service aboard pelagic research cruises. Soon they will be gripped by the wonder of encountering a prehistoric titan face to face. Anthropology departments lighten course loads, knowing that stories of living Megalodon will become global cultural phenomena myths reborn into scientific reality. Funding skyrockets. Foundations that once championed coral reef restoration pivot to support megalodon research, viewing it as the ultimate pinnacle of marine discovery. Crowdfunding campaigns sprout, offering donors the chance to name a specimen or sponsor a submersible dive. Prizes for the first clear video capture of megalodon and full-profile balloon into seven-figure sums. Suddenly, paleontology and marine biology are no longer siloed disciplines. They fuse into a multidisciplinary gold rush. On shore, aquariers scramble to build megalodon viewing tanks, giant, reinforced acrylic enclosures fed by deep water. Engineers calculate flow rates to maintain oxygenation for a 15-meter shark, designing filtration systems to handle several tons of waste per day. Biologists plan to study live shark circulation and metabolic rates, correlating gill morphology to oxygen uptake speeds. Such data could revolutionize our understanding of gigantism, offering insights into the limits of vertebrate growth. In the science labs, historians of science dust off old monographs from the 19th century, mercurial reports of giant teeth washing up on the unmapped beaches of New Zealand and Africa. New carbon dating techniques on sediment layers allow reassessment of those finds. Where once such teeth were dismissed as myth, now they become crucial evidence for reconstructing historical distribution. Historians track published sightings, noting a century-long trail of giant shark rumors, some of which may mark true megalodon encounters. Graduate students in paleoecology race to reanalyze ancient isotope data from fossil teeth, re-estimating megalodon's diet breadth and thermal tolerance. Was the shark stenothermic, preferring narrow temperature bands, or more eurythermic, able to follow whale pods across tropical and temperate seas? Live sampling of blood and muscle tissue will answer these questions, answer them in real time, rather than waiting for the echoes of strontium in ancient enamel. Veterinary specialists boarded the first submersible ready to intervene in case of injury-sapient risk management for a creature never intended to be handled by humans. Plans for remote anesthesia devices are discussed. Microdarts delivering specialized anesthetic cocktails calibrated for cartilage physiology, avoiding the classic pitfalls of blood pressure collapse in large fish. Quarantine protocols are drawn up for live specimens, anticipating the need to study blood pathogens or assess microbial communities that evolved in megalodon's unique gut. Curators at maritime museums scramble to clear exhibition halls for a living fossil showcase. Pre-exhibition marketing promises interactive displays, contrasting ancient tooth fossils with vectored video of the living shark's jaws. Bioinformatics teams prepare phylogenetic trees that will branch in real time as live data arrives, illustrating megalodon's place among elasmo branches with unprecedented clarity. Meanwhile, regulatory bodies and even the United Nations draft emergency addenda to the Convention on Migratory Species. A megalodon clause outlines strict guidelines on interactions, tagging, and public disclosure. The clause debates whether the species should be granted the highest conservation status, protecting it from all but the most necessary scientific pursuits. Lawyers pore over marine protected area boundaries, expanding zones to guarantee that critical habitats remain off-limits to fishing and shipping. Back at sea, the first successful biopsy yields cellular material that glows under fluorescent dyes, confirming unprecedented genomic stability. RNA extraction reveals active gene expression patterns once thought lost genes for cartilage regeneration, for extreme blood pressure tolerance, even for immune system innovations that help the shark resist deep-sea pathogens. Pharmaceutical companies take notice. If megalodon's immune system evolved to function under crushing pressure and cold, perhaps novel antibiotics or anti-inflammatory compounds lie hidden within its genome. As the vessel's lab screens cell cultures, collaborators at cryobiology centers in Norway prepare for long-term tissue preservation at sub-zero temperatures. They planned to freeze samples for resurrection ecology experiments, comparing modern shark cell lines to Megalodon for insights into limb regeneration and cartilage defects. Bioethicists warn of unforeseen consequences, urging slow progress and public oversight. Yet the momentum is unstoppable. The race to study Megalodon becomes a defining moment for marine science, a convergence of paleontology, genomics, ocean engineering, ethics, policy, and public engagement. For the scientists at sea, every hour brings new revelations. Sonar traces of hunting behavior, jittery bioacoustic responses when submersibles approach, startling footage of the shark's asymmetrical caudal fin flickering like a piston in the darkness. When the first peer-reviewed paper on Megalodon blood properties publishes less than 6 months after the initial sighting, it makes headlines worldwide. Marine biologists herald a new era of living paleontology, where time itself is bridged by live specimens. Grad students cite the Megalodon genome in groundbreaking dissertations on vertebrate gigantism. Conservationists leverage the shark's charismatic awe to protect deep-sea ecosystems previously overlooked. In this unfolding chapter of discovery, Megalodon proves to be more than a scientific goldmine. It is a catalyst that redraws our understanding of the ocean's capacity for mystery, the resilience of life forms shaped in ages past, and the boundless potential of interdisciplinary science racing against the clock. And above all, it reminds us that even after millions of years, the deep blue can still surprise us with living legends, unfurling before our eyes, a story no museum exhibit could ever fully capture. The sonar console in the submarine command center lit up with an impossible return. A moving mass some 50 meters, long gliding along the seabed, too slow and too heavy to be any known whale, too large to be a submarine. Within moments, fleet headquarters around the globe received the same alert. Anomalous sonar echoes unaccounted for by any charted vessel. In Washington, London, Beijing, and Moscow, naval intelligence officers convened secure video conferences to exchange raw data. Everyone knew the implications. If even one Megalodon remained alive, navies would be forced to reconceive the ocean as a battlefield rather than simply a domain of commerce and patrol. By dawn, the U.S. Navy's Office of Naval Research had activated Project Titanus, a black-budget program to weaponize every scrap of megatooth knowledge. Teams of marine biologists, acousticians, weapons engineers, and shark specialists were drafted from civilian universities into classified research wards. Under the watchful eyes of admirals, they pored over fossil records to refine estimates of the creature's sensory reach. If Megalodon's ancestors could detect whale heartbeats from hundreds of meters away, perhaps its modern descendants could still sense the electromagnetic signature of a submarine's reactor. Some officers whispered the unspoken question: did we just awaken the world's deadliest living sonar array? Into the next week, squadrons of unmanned gliders crisscrossed the continental shelf, their passive sonar listening for low-frequency pulses unlike any known marine mammal. Surface ships towed arrays of pressure-mounted hydrophones, each listening station feeding data into supercomputers, trained to filter out thunderous volcanic rumbles and clandestine submarine maneuvers. The Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy had activated a similar program, code-named Deep Dragon. Their newest Yuan-class submarines were rerouted to shadow-known migration paths of baleen whales, baiting sensors with pre-recorded whale calls to lure a megatooth predator into detection range. Russian Arctic fleet vessels prepared to test underwater charges, calibrated not to destroy, but to repel acoustic grenades, tuned to frequencies that might disrupt the giant shark as neural pathways. Within days, Office of Naval Research Engineers had developed prototype sonic fences. These slender cables, strung between buoys and seafloor anchors, emitted continuous low-frequency oscillations at amplitudes just at the threshold of beleaguered whales, but far above anything recorded in modern marine environments. The theory was that a sufficiently powerful acoustic field could create an exclusion zone, deterring Megalodon from approaching critical naval anchorages. In the Gulf of Mexico, a ring of such fences was deployed around a decommissioned oil platform converted into a research testbed. Acoustic engineers held their breath as the system powered up. On the first night, sonar logs showed a massive return veering away from the ring proof. Perhaps that sound alone might chase a prehistoric predator. But the predator was not so easily cowed. In the weeks that followed, naval captains reported hull scrapes and dented sonar domes on frigates escorting cargo convoys. Divers investigating hull damage found tooth impressions too large for any known sharp triangular gouges nearly half a meter across, pressed into the protective outer plating. In the Persian Gulf, a guided missile corvette suffered a localized breach in its bow sonar array. The pressure hull itself remained intact, but the plastic fairing was shredded in a pattern, suggesting a curious test bite rather than a full-blown attack. The Admiralty's threat assessments were suddenly filled with photos of split nets, shredded nylon lines, and dented sonar pods, evidence that a living Megalodon was far more than a sonar anomaly. Naval planners argued over response options. Some advocated for outright hunting operations, heavy charge depth charges. That might scare the shark into deeper waters, or even fatally wound it. Others warned of ecological backlash. Killing the last of a living fossil could spark an international outcry far worse than any whale-culling debate. A compromise emerged: targeted removal of juvenile specimens near suspected nursery areas, coupled with rigorous study of adults. On a remote atoll in the Caribbean, a joint task force of U.S. Navy SEALs and marine mammal rescue teams staged a clandestine operation. The objective: capture a subadult Megalodon pup for tagging and medical examination. The insertion was cinematic. A stealth fastboat skimming just under radar, SEALs in dry suits armed with specialized harpoon darts, loaded with tranquilizers adapted from veterinary protocols used on large elasmo branches. In a shallow lagoon filled with juvenile reef sharks, the baited trap lines were set chunks of tuna tethered to subsurface cages. At dawn, the team struck. The sedative charge fired true, embedding in the pup's dorsal musculature. Adrenaline surged as the young shark thrashed against its restraints. 6 meters of tooth and muscle, still capable of powerful tail slaps. Within minutes, the tranquilizer took effect. The pup was secured, hoisted aboard a tethered crane, and flown to a floating research platform miles offshore. For weeks, veterinarians monitored the pup's vitals in a specialized pen water filtered through shock-absorbent screens. Oxygenation systems capable of handling massive metabolic demands. Biopsies of skin and cartilage were taken. Blood samples stored in cryogenic vials as priceless proof of living Megalodon physiology. Genomic sequencing began immediately, aiming to unlock adaptations to deep sea pressure and cold temperature. The defense contractors lined up to license tissue data, hoping to extract novel proteins for pressure-resistant coatings and stealth materials. Meanwhile, other navies watched closely. The Royal Navy dispatched a hunter-killer submarine to the South Atlantic, guided by data from task force sensors. Its mission: track adult Megalodon as it patrolled currents near the Falkland Islands, a region known for migrating southern right whales. Sonar operators referred to the return as Leviathan, marveling at the giant arches moving against the ocean floor. Instructors trained new sonar analysts on the creature's signature: a broad, slow sweep across multiple frequency bands, impossible to confuse with any human-made vessel. A British sub ran silent protocols, minimizing its own signature to avoid spooking the shark before acoustic tagging could be attempted. As these operations unfolded, the geopolitical stakes rose. The United Nations convened an emergency session under the Convention on Migratory Species. Delegates debated whether to list the Megalodon as a protected species surviving past its extinction date, or as a hostile force requiring containment. A proposal led by maritime nations called for the establishment of Megalodon zones, marine sanctuaries where naval and commercial activity would be restricted to minimize predator-human encounters. Environmental NGOs joined the fray, demanding a moratorium on lethal interactions, even as rescue teams prepared anti-shark nets for coastal communities. In classified meetings, intelligence officers mused over the military applications. Could knowledge of Megalodon's electrosensory anatomy lead to new passive submarine detection methods? If the shark could sense the electromagnetic fields of fish and mammals at a distance, perhaps similar principles could be used to locate stealth submarines. Naval research labs began reverse engineering the ampillo of Lorenzini tiny gel-filled canals in a shark's snout to develop electroreceptive sonar arrays. A prototype shark eye sensor promised to detect small electrical anomalies in the water, picking up on periscopes, antenna arrays, even the stray electric fields generated by onboard electronics in submarines. As weeks turned into months, the ethical debates grew as fierce as the scientific ones. Naval chaplains and marine ethicists questioned the morality of pharmacologically suppressing or killing an ancient life form. Could a creature that survived 3 million years of ocean change be considered a living treasure rather than a target? Some admirals countered that any large predator capable of damaging naval vessels posed too great a risk to ignore. Ultimately, a classified directive emerged: no lethal force without explicit authorization from the highest levels of government. Instead, the emphasis shifted to containment, deterrence, and strategic negotiation. Across military academies, strategic studies courses sprang up. Marine apex predators in naval warfare. Cadets debated wargames where a rogue megalodon disrupts port operations, sinks supply convoys, and forces entire fleets to reroute around predator hot spots. Scenario planners examined supply chain vulnerabilities. Oil supertankers diverted from the Persian Gulf, cruise ships skirting the Caribbean, and undersea cables abandoned in known shark corridors. Encrypted briefings classified such scenarios as potential Tier 1, threats on par with cyber attacks and nuclear proliferation. Naval architects rethought ship design. Future warships under construction incorporated reinforced hull bulges, double layer of high-tensile steel with sacrificial outer planking designed to absorb a single bite. Propulsion shifts moved toward magnetohydrodynamic drive systems, eliminating propeller cavitation noise that might attract a giant predator. Sonar domes were replaced by hull-embedded panels, leaving no vulnerable protrusions to be bitten away. Standard anti-torpedo nets were adapted into retractable shark curtains, deploying from underwings of frigates in high-risk areas. During a multinational naval exercise in the South Pacific, U.S., Australian and Japanese destroyers conducted coordinated operations under the guise of anti-submarine warfare training. The true objective: test a bubble curtain, a wall of rising air beneath the hull, intended to mask acoustic signatures and possibly discourage predator approaches. As ships steamed through these curtains, sport fishing fleets watched in awe. 2 adjacent frigates emerged from the shimmering bubbles with no scratches. It was a small victory, but enough to earn a cadre of sonar technicians and marine biologists medals for innovative predator countermeasures. Ultimately, the story of navies weaponizing and hunting Megalodon captured the world's attention. It was no longer a prehistoric curiosity, but a living force demanding both reverence and restraint. Naval chiefs acknowledged that while science could outpace ancient evolution, containment rather than conquest would define the coming era. Hunted or studied Megalodon had reshaped naval doctrine, redefined marine technology, and reminded humanity that the ocean's deepest mysteries still lie beyond our most advanced weapons, even in the steel hulls of nuclear submarines and the vaulted decks of aircraft carriers. The return of a living legend forced us to acknowledge the sea itself as a sovereign realm, ruled by forces older and far more powerful than any empire built upon its waves. The arrival of a new apex predator would rewrite the age-old struggle between whales and their hunters, transforming familiar migrations into life-or-death gambits and forcing marine giants to evolve behaviorally and socially at breakneck speed. In today's oceans, baleen and toothed whales navigate vast distances guided by ancient instincts honed over millions of years. A time they're calving to safe, sheltered bays, travel in cohesive pods, and deploy vocalizations that coordinate group movements and warn of danger. But a living megalodon faster, stronger, armed with jaws capable of cleaving a juvenile whale in a single bite, would shatter those routines. Calves, once protected in shallow nursery lagoons, would become floating targets. Mothers would no longer lead nurseries into sunlit shallows, but into murky fjords or river estuaries, too narrow for a 15-meter shark his broad frame. The Chesapeake Bay and western Pacific inlets, once favored for their calm waters, might no longer be safe. Instead, newborn gray whales could be driven upriver, weaving through brackish currents that slow their tiny limbs, but offer sanctuary from a predator that cannot navigate shifting salinity. Salmon runs and tidal flows would mark new battlegrounds as calves flounder upriver, their cries echoing through riparian corridors rather than open sea. Pods of humpback whales, which today greet humans with acrobatic breaches, would adopt new formations. The classic V-shaped pod would tighten into a circular protective ring, calves at the center, flanked by adults honking warning calls. When a megalodon appears, the ring would constrict, adult flukes slapping the water's surface in calamitous waves designed to stun and deter. Drones and autonomous gliders monitoring migrating pods might capture footage of these living barricade shadows of an evolutionary arms race unfolding in real time. Acoustic adaptations would follow rapidly. Whales communicate across hundreds of kilometers using low-frequency moans that ripple through crests and troughs. Under megalodon threat, vocal patterns would shift higher, trading range for clarity. Rather than booming pulses that carry far, narrowband whistles and clicks would convey detailed information about predator location, speed, and intent. Researchers tuning hydrophones to whale song would detect an unprecedented complexity in calls' background chatter replaced by frantic alarms, biologically stamped codes wording "shark near" in a dialect no human linguist has yet cataloged. Migratory corridors would mutate. Southern right whales traversing the South Atlantic might abandon the open drift between South America and Africa, hugging continental slopes instead where deep canyons allow whales to descend beyond megalodon's oxygen-dependent comfort zone. Yet even at depths of 200 meters, the shark's massive tail could generate internal waves, disrupting plankton layers and alerting prey to its approach. Whales would dive deeper still, pressing into dark trenches previously reserved for deep-diving beaked whales. The ocean floor, once a refuge for dodgy odontocetes, would now chair a perilous negotiation between mammal and shark. Predation pressure would reshape population structures. Juvenile mortality rates could skyrocket from today, ice roughly 10% to 50% or more in heavily trafficked nursery grounds. Without human intervention, baleen whale numbers would plummet, triggering conservation emergencies that dwarf the losses from whaling. International agencies would scramble to designate megalodon-free zones, deploying acoustic fences round calving areas and mandating low-frequency deterrent beacons to ward off the giant shark. GANPA's Global Apex Predator Area treaties would emerge, legally protecting T-whale habitats and restricting naval exercises that interrupt acoustic barriers. In turn, whale body plans might evolve. Over generations, natural selection would favor calves born with thicker blubber or reinforced cranial bones capable of withstanding a single megalodon bite. Carotenoid-rich skin layers, initially evolved for UV protection, could become additional armor, their pigmentation shifting in response to friction with the shark's skin. Fossil evidence of healed bite marks, once rare traces of prehistoric encounters, would multiply in future skeletal records, chronicling an era of intense predator pressure. Social hierarchies would intensify. Matriarchs, those old humpbacks whose knowledge extends decades, would become indispensable navigators and strategists, their memories of safe passages and past shark encounters guiding entire pods. Loss of older females, as they inevitably become prime targets near calving grounds, would imperil pod cohesion. Marine biologists might document a collapse in pod structures once the wisdom keepers vanish, replaced by transient groups lacking coordinated defense tactics. Orca killer whales, specialists at hunting larger whales today, would find a new niche. Harassment teams targeting large megalodon juveniles or injured adults. These marine wolves would team up with pod whales, using bursts of ultrasonic clicks to confuse the shark's electrosensory organs before striking at vulnerable fins. Photographers capturing killer whale raids might witness dorsal fin mosaics circling a stunned megalodon, folding it into a slow-motion death spiral. Such events would likely be as lethal for orcas as they are bold. The prey dynamics would cascade downward. Fewer whales mean fewer fecal plumes fertilizing surface waters, an essential nutrient conduit for phytoplankton. Plankton blooms would wane, affecting krill swarms and the small fish that feed on them. Pelagic fish stocks would ebb, altering the diets of pinnibeds and seabirds. Fisheries managers would confront unprecedented losses across tuna, mackerel, and herring populations, not from overfishing, but from a predator-driven trophic collapse. In these stressed systems, deep-diving whales like sperm whales might enjoy brief relief. Their ability to plunge to 2,000 meters searching for squid would keep them out of most megalodons' reach, if indeed the shark can tolerate such pressures. Sperm whales could adopt deep-sea feeding more consistently, their sonar clicks and primary diet shifting further from squid into abyssal fish. Yet if megalodon evolves thermoregulation akin to the modern great white's countercurrent heat exchangers, even the mesopelagic zone could turn into a hunting ground. Calving grounds would see human interventions gone mainstream. Engineers might build submerged breakwaters, lined with anti-shark nets and weighted barriers, creating corridors safe enough for calves to swim with limited risk. Satellite tagging of mother-calf pairs would feed live location data into global monitoring centers. When a pair drifts too close to known predator paths, Coast Guards would launch drone-equipped patrol boats, warning whales with underwater speakers tuned to megalodon deterrent frequencies. Cultural shifts would reflect the new predator landscape. Whale-watching charters, once joyous celebrations of marine life, would evolve into tense reconnaissance missions. Passengers would track their bleeps on in-boat displays, alerted when a wavering signal hints at a nearby shark. The romance of sunset cruises would be replaced by silent watches, binoculars scanning the horizon for dorsal fin betrayals. In gift shops, whale plush toys would perch behind glass nostalgic tokens of an era when humans and whales frolicked in the same waters. Conservation priorities would realign around co-protection. Instead of solely safeguarding whales, governments would allocate resources to study and preserve megalodon as a keystone predator. Marine protected areas would center on shared corridors, balancing whale nursery preservation with shark conservation. Ecologists would track predator-prey population balances in real time, using drone swarms and underwater sensor networks to model the dynamic equilibrium between species that were once separated by eons. Genetic research on whale populations would accelerate. Scientists would sequence genomes of modern baleen whales to identify alleles associated with predator evasion rapid stress hormone responses, wound healing accelerations, enhanced immune systems to stave off infections from bite wounds. Transgenic research might explore the feasibility of transferring such traits into livestock or human medicine, using whale-derived compounds to develop faster-healing wound treatments. As whales adapt, so too would their migratory windows. Climate-driven shifts in sea temperature already prompt earlier or later migrations. a living megalodon would amplify that phenomenon. Blue whales might depart Antarctic feeding grounds earlier in the season, seeking cooler, predator-free waters before megalodon appears in warmer currents. Satellite imagery and acoustic sensor grids would map these shifting timelines, revealing an ocean in flux-early blooms of krill, followed by empty beaches, open waters vacated by pinnipeds, and a haunting silence replacing the chorus of whale song. Tourism ventures might adopt augmented reality overlays. Visitors don AR goggles that project virtual whale pods in predator-safe zones, their movements choreographed around live sonar data. From coastal observatories, travelers would witness virtual whales migrating through reefs, while real whales slip below the waves, guarded by acoustic fences. The bittersweet dichotomy of seeing digital life where real life once flourished would underscore our uneasy coexistence with a predator that changed the rules irrevocably. In the broader tapestry of oceanic life, whale wars reimagined would be a stark reminder that apex predators shape entire ecosystems. Whether whales evolve thicker skins, alter migration routes, cooperate with orcas, or rely on human engineering for refuge, their struggle against a living megalodon would become a keystone case study in resilience and adaptation. Scientists, policymakers, and coastal communities would bear witness to a rewriting of nature as playbook, where the ocean, as sovereign rulers, must adapt or vanish, and where the ultimate test of survival belongs to those who once ruled unchallenged. For centuries, mariners have spun tales of jaw-snapping leviathans and tentacled krakens emerging from the ink-black sea. In coastal hamlets, fishermen whisper of colossal beasts that drag entire whaling ships beneath the waves, leaving only splintered timbers. Those became bedtime stories, fantastical warnings against arrogance on the open ocean. But if Megalodon prowls today's waters, those legends cease to be mere fables. Every ragged tooth torn from a shattered net, every sonar echo too massive for a whale, would resurrect the sea monsters of old as undeniable reality. Imagine the wake of a modern trawler, streaked with crimson, nets rent in ragged gouges as a 15-meter shark drifts off into the dusk. Sailors would recall the sagas of the kraken, the giant squid said to circle their keels, and realize that predator and prey, once mythical, now share the same dark depths. Suddenly, the lines between squid lore and shark science blur. Massive tentacles glimpsed in twilight might belong to a wounded giant biting back. Marine biologists would scramble to reconcile cephalopod ecology with a living superpredator stalking the abyss. The ocean becomes an open page in a storybook of dread, where every whisper of spray seems to carry a monstrous echo. In medieval port cities, cathedral spires chime for saints invoked against sea serpents. Processions once begged for deliverance from draconic horrors beneath the deep. Today, sailors might perform similar rituals before casting off, scanning the horizon for the telltale triangular fin. Archive librarians dust off vellum codices describing winged dragons rising from whirlpools. Historians cross-reference those with sonar maps of undersea canyons to pinpoint likely hunting grounds. What once symbolized divine wrath now illustrates an ecological truth. Where currents funnel prey, apex predators congregate. Gods and demons conceded their thrones to nature's greatest shark, yet their names live on in every trembling ship's log. Arthurian legends speak of nightly quests to slay Cytia, the whale-like horror of ancient seas. In the 21st century, marine engineers build remote-operated vehicles armed with sampling harpoons, hoping to capture tissue rather than spill blood, but their aims are no less heroic. Cameras mounted on steel cages record the vast gullet of a predator born in the Miocene, jaws displacing water the way Excalibur cleaves armor. Each frame is a frame from a legend. Only now, the hero is science itself, unearthing truths from layers of sediment and sea lore. The quest to catalog and understand Megalodon becomes a modern grail proof that myth can persist in flesh and cartilage. The Pacific Islands tell of Maui battling enormous fishmen and dredging up islands from the depths. Today, satellite imagery shows underwater ridges arching like spines, the perfect layers for apex predators. Local navigators, guided by wave patterns and lore handed down by birthright, mark no-go zones for fishing canoes, places where the water boils without volcanic heat. These same zones yield the strongest sonar returns, now identified as Megalodon hunting grounds. Myth and marine science converge as ancestral wisdom transforms into predictive ecology, safeguarding communities with coastal maps etched in oral tradition. Norse sagas speak of Jarmungander, the Midgard serpent encircling the world's oceans, poised to crush the world in Ragnarok. A living Megalodon need not circle the globe to inspire a comparable sense of dread. Its presence in the shipping lanes of the North Atlantic, once niche for cod and lobster boats, would rewrite maritime charts overnight. Insurance underwriters would list Megalodon peril alongside piracy and storms, adding new annotations to almanacs that once listed only wind and swell. Sailors clad in modern foul-weather gear would still pray for calm seas, haunted by the shape that glides beneath. In Japanese folklore, the isohachi, monstrous fish that swallow entire boats, prowls tidal flats at dawn. Today's whale watchers in the Sea of Japan might glimpse a half-submerged dorsal fin breaking the glassy surface, mistaking it at first for a humpback. Tourist captains would radio frantic advisories. Approach with caution, monster reported. Amateurs armed with smartphones would capture viral footage of bristling teeth and slashing tails. The digital proof that Isahashi never vanished, only slept. Coastal CCTV would record the monsters that spooked Ido's fishermen, reviving centuries-old haiku with new lines about living nightmares. Classical poets described Charybdis and Scylla as twin perils, whirlpools, and monsters at opposite sides of a strait. Now, oceanographers chart eddies along the Strait of Gibraltar, where unexpected depressions in the water surface betray a deep dive by a massive shark. Vessels hugging the safer path past these bogies would become living embodiments of Odysseus's cunning. Marine traffic controllers would issue advisories. Transit at maximum safe speed, maintain visual contact with surface craft, expect sudden cresting waves. Each skipper's cautious passage channels the cunning of an ancient hero facing mythical beasts. Stories of the Leviathan, a biblical terror with impenetrable scales, gain a fresh reading in the context of thick, sharp denticles. Scuba divers near reef walls might spot armored skin compared to human palm prints. Those who venture beyond coral ledges would do so in reinforced cages, their guides muttering psalms of protection. Marine theologians might once again preach from pulpits that the Creator's hand forged these creatures for reasons beyond human ken, restoring awe and humility where once our species felt dominion. Victorian-era circuses exhibited sea serpents in traveling menageries, enshrining saw-toothed jaws in glass cabinets. Museum curators, now confronted with living specimens, would scramble to update displays, glass cases replaced by dry dock pens rigged with sonar triggers. Cryptozoologists once speculated about Megalodon based on fossil teeth. Today, their couch-bound debates become conference keynotes on bioluminescence and cartilage metabolism. The boundary between fringe legend and mainstream marine biology collapses as eyewitness video becomes required reading in zoology textbooks. Pirates once feared monstrous beasts on Bluebeard's crow's nest, mistaking rogue waves for tentacled attacks. Modern Coast Guard crews would share those fears, their radar scanners scanning the swells for anomalies that dart unnerving distances. Recreational sailors would equip vessels with real-time sonar displays, scanning below the keels like submarine captains. Every rolling oceanic expanse becomes a theater of suspicion, where the dark lady of the deep might lurk beyond radar's reach. Mariners learn new skills: underwater acoustic navigation, early predator detection, in place of old lessons on sail terming. Travel writers romanticize Tahitian lagoons as paragons of safety, the kind of waters one could wade to one's knees without fear. In a world with living Megalodon, travel guides would change swimmable to shark-proof enclosure required, and coral snorkeling to glass-bottom sanctuary. Soft sands become off-limits at dawn and dusk, replaced by protected beachfront promenades enclosed by transparent steel barriers. Luxury retreats boast indoor seawater pools with simulated tides, touting authentic ocean experience behind impenetrable walls. Tourists pay a premium for simulated freedom on sterile decks, rather than genuine risk beneath real waves. Mariners' weather lore, red sky at night, sailors' delight, would now include sea monster omens. A sudden calm might signal the hunter's approach, as Megalodon uses the slipstream to ambush prey. Calendar apps on marine navigation consoles would generate alerts at lunar cycles when tidal flows funnel plankton, whales, and consequently, sharks. Coastal communities revive old bonfire ceremonies, lighting smoky fires by the shore to create surface turbulence believed to deter sea monsters. Fire and steam become modern rituals against a prehistoric predator's return. Legends of the white serpent of Cornwall, whose rising fins sank fishing smacks, would gain new authenticity. Local pubs would erect signs reading, "Beware the white fin Megalodon sightings ahead," and offer pints named Leviathan Ale. Samuel Taylor Coleridge as rhyme of the ancient mariner would find fresh resonance as mariners swapped verses on deck, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of the ancient predator. Tourist gift shops would hawk replica teeth and printed editions of Coleridge, bound in waterproof covers. Poetry and paleontology sold side by side. In Polynesian mythology, the underwater spirit Mo'o shapes islands with tail strikes. Today, as geologists mapping seafloor topography might see new trenches or collapsed caves carved by Megalodon, sheer force. Cultural practitioners, kahuna, and navigators would lead rituals to appease the marine spirits, gathering at reef edges to sing chants passed down through generations. Their voices would echo across the surf, a living bridge between mythic past and scientific present. Even in laboratories, researchers would show video of these chants to algorithms learning about predator-prey acoustics. Renaissance cartographers once drew sea monsters in uncharted waters as warnings to explorers. Modern cartographers, staring at high-resolution bathymetric maps, now highlight Megalodon zones, analogous to the old "Here be dragons." Navigation apps would flag these zones in red, advising mariners to steer clear or proceed under caution. The map's margins, once festooned with dragons and whales, fill in with polygonal overlays and sonar risk scores. The archaic image of a horned beast by a bold line returns, albeit in digital form and backed by real-time sensor networks. Folklore of sunken ghost ships, crewed by skeletal mariners, transforms when hull fragments wash ashore bearing teeth-shaped indentations. Those bites weren't curses, but collisions with living predators. Underwater archaeologists would stare at 17th century galleon rams, now scarred by an anatomically modern predator of Jurassic proportions. Instead of attributing damage to storms or mutiny, they draft reports citing Megalodon interactions, rewriting maritime history with a paleontological footnote. Finally, think of contemporary media. Films of great white sharks once thrilled audiences, but now would pale beside the first broadcast of a living Megalodon. Documentaries would feature the roar of sonar returns and the tremor in a pilot's voice when the shark's fin eclipses the sun. Viral social media loops of gargantuan jaws opening would spark global conversation threads, theorizing the lineage from fossil to flesh. Hashtags like #SeaMonsterLives and think pieces comparing modern megafauna to dinosaurs rediscovered. Myths that once lived in the shadows of our apologies for arrogance would now flood every screen. In every coastal village, every naval academy, every science conference and late-night YouTube channel, legends would cease to be distant echoes. The kraken, leviathan, isohashi, and Jarmungander all become chapters in the same tale, a tale of life's capacity to outlast extinction and myth, its power to preserve truth through story. As the ancient shark cuts its path through modern seas, we learn that the darkest myths are those guided by memory continuing beyond the fossil record into living, breathing reality. In that convergence of myth and science, we rediscover not only the ocean's depths, but the depths of our own wonder. Coastal communities once built on the promise of sunlit seas would find their economies unraveling beneath the weight of new fears. Every industry tied to the ocean, directly or indirectly, would confront a collapse of confidence as people recoiled from waters prowled by a predator bigger than any known shark. The ripple effects would extend from ports to plate, from shipping routes to seaside resorts, triggering a cascade of bankruptcies, and bailouts that rewrite the map of global trade and tourism. Container shipping, the arteries of world commerce, would experience the first shock. Carriers that once crisscrossed the continental shelf at predictable intervals would be forced to reroute vessels into deeper, safer lanes, often doubling transit times and fuel costs. Major choke points like the Suez Canal and Panama Canal would see traffic slow as cargo liners adopt zigzag patrol patterns to evade predator corridors. Demurrage fees would skyrocket when ships weighed offshore for clearance, drenching insurers and freight forwarders in red ink. Exporters, especially perishable goods, shippers would scramble for refrigerated storage alternatives as delays threatened produce markets from Europe to Asia. Insurance underwriters would scramble to reprice every marine risk. Hull and machinery premiums, once a fraction of vessel operating costs, could multiply fivefold in Megalodon zones, the region's nearest known shark sightings. Shipowners might face the choice of abandoning cover or upgrading to bespoke shark-resistant hulls, double-skinned plating, and sacrificial outer layers borrowed from military ship design. War risk insurers would add shark peril endorsements similar to piracy riders, triggering arbitration over every dented sonar dome or flooded cargo hold. Banks financing vessels could call loans, requiring additional collateral to cover idle days and hull damage, squeezing an industry already wrestling supply chain snarls. Commercial fishing fleets would reel in losses that dwarf any historical catch decline. Trawlers and longliners hauling tuna, swordfish, and groundfish would see nets shredded by curious bites, gear left drifting in sharp, torn wreckage. Fishing grounds along continental slopes once productive nurseries for cod, hake, and haddock would empty as vessels retreat to coastal lagoons or cease operations altogether. Processing plants built around daily hauls of several hundred tons would idle, layoffs mounting. Seafood auctions that used to hum with bids would go dark, pushing prices through the roof and driving restaurant owners to shutter kitchens reliant on fresh ocean fare. Tourism, the lifeblood of countless island economies and coastal resorts, would collapse under the weight of fear. White sand beaches would empty behind red warning flags, lifeguard towers repurposed as surveillance posts. Dive shops would shut down as insurance refuses coverage for cage dive operations, snorkel tours, and wreck explorations. Cruise lines, once offering idyllic tropical itineraries, would reroute ships through safer inland waterways or abandon coastal ports entirely. Passengers demanding refunds would swamp customer service desks, while travel agencies recalibrate marketing budgets toward mountain lodges and river cruises, a frantic pivot that few would manage profitably. Hospitality sectors would nosedive in response. Beachfront hotels and all-inclusive resorts would operate at skeleton capacity or close permanently. Conference centers overlooking turquoise lagoons would lose event bookings, repurposed as emergency housing for displaced workers. Restaurants that built their reputations on fresh seafood and waterfront views would lose half their clientele overnight, facing supply shortages and skyrocketing import costs. When even high-end establishments can't guarantee a safe crew for offshore shark deterrent patrols. They join a mass exodus from the once bustling boardwalk economy. Boat builders and marine equipment suppliers would face a stark choice: innovate or perish. Local shipyards churning out sport fishing vessels, sailing yachts, and charter boats would see orders evaporate as clients balk at the expense of shark-proof reinforcements. Composite manufacturers specializing in hulls would pivot to armored plating, but the R&D costs for new materials gel coat mixes laced with deterrent compounds, sacrificial foil layers, would price small yards out of the market. Survival would hinge on government grants and defense contracts, turning pleasure craft builders into adjuncts of naval R&D. Port operations and logistics hubs would buckle under traffic rerouting and heightened security. Container terminals in Florida, the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, and West Africa hotspots for shark sightings would impose exclusion zones, forcing ships to anchor offshore and offload via smaller craft. The extra stevedoring shifts and pilotage services would cut into the thin margins terminal operators scrape by. Inland trucking and rail networks, already strained by pandemic slowdowns, would inherit the overflow piling on hours of delays and driver shortages. Clients shipping time-sensitive goods would pay premium rates, shifting demand to air freight and sending cargo capacity and prices through the roof. Real estate markets would unwind in parallel. Oceanfront property values, once a symbol of affluence, would crater as buyers factor in the risk of storm surges and shark incursions. Mortgage lenders would tighten loan-to-value ratios on coastal homes, hiking interest rates or refusing mortgages in high-risk blue zones. Retirees fleeing bustling waterfronts might fuel inland housing booms, but swaths of condos, beach bungalows, and luxury villas would devolve into ghost towns. Local tax revenues, tied closely to property assessments and tourism fees, would collapse, triggering budget shortfalls for municipal services, schools, and infrastructure maintenance. The offshore energy sector would brace for upheaval. Oil and gas platforms anchored to the seabed by drill pipes and risers would need shark deterrent nets, massive hoop structures extending hundreds of meters outward. Wind farm developers would install undersea fences around turbine foundations at enormous expense. The added weight and maintenance costs, biannual net replacements, and sonar array calibrations would drive up the levelized cost of energy, slowing the green energy transition. Some projects would be abandoned, leaving seabed cabling at risk of bite damage and posing environmental hazards from abandoned infrastructure. Aquaculture ventures would struggle but adapt. Offshore fish farms, where salmon pens once floated unprotected, would relocate to land-based RAS, recirculating aquaculture systems. Freshwater inland facilities would sprout, drawing down capital investment from coastal communities. Yet inland RAS carries high operating costs: energy, filtration, disease control that would be passed along to consumers in the form of more expensive seafood. Coastal economies lose the fallback option of farming, while rich markets see fish prices spike, widening the protein gap in developing nations. In academic and governmental circles, marine research budgets would balloon. Universities and national oceanographic institutes would vie for grants to study Megalodon ecosystem interactions. Submersible fleets once dedicated to coral reef mapping would be repurposed for predator monitoring. Seabed cable networks originally for scientific data collection would integrate acoustic buoys and shark deterrent fields. While these programs create jobs in research and engineering, they compete directly for public funds with healthcare, education, and climate mitigation, sparking political debates over resource prioritization. Technology and defense industries would reap a windfall. Companies specializing in acoustic deterrence, sensor networks, autonomous drones, and specialized hull materials would see explosive demand. R&D labs would sprint to patent sonic bubble curtain systems and deployable mesh barriers. Governments would funnel military budgets into dual-use technologies. Anti-submarine warfare adapted for anti-shark purposes. Yet this arms race with a living fossil would raise ethical concerns. Harsh deterrent fields risk collateral damage to dolphins, sea turtles, and fish populations, triggering protests from conservationists. National budgets would pivot toward naval and coast guard expansions. Countries with extensive coastlines, Australia, Chile, Norway, the United States, would commission new patrol vessels and invest in undersea detection satellites. The United Nations might approve a Global Apex Predator Fund to coordinate monitoring and exclusion zones, but further austerity measures would be needed to cover the ballooning costs. These shifts could provoke backlash from taxpayers more concerned with healthcare and social services, fueling political instability in coastal districts, where the sea monster tax becomes a bitter pill. Fishing communities throughout the developing world, often dependent on small-scale artisan fisheries, would endure the harshest blows. In places like West Africa, the Philippines, and the Amazon estuary, where fish represent both income and protein, shark-driven declines in catch volumes would worsen food insecurity. Aid agencies would scramble to introduce alternative livelihoods, seaweed farming, inland aquaculture, eco-tour guiding, but the cultural fabric woven around generations of fishing families would fray. Young people might migrate to cities, creating urban slums and straining already fragile social infrastructure. Tourist towns reliant on whale watching and recreational fishing would hollow out. Captains who once guided boats to see humpbacks breach would find their fleets moored indefinitely after drone surveillance picks up a high-risk shark signature. Coastal gift shops, beachfront cafes, and snorkel rental shops would shutter, replaced by shuttered arcades and boarded-up storefronts. Local governments would zone out ocean vantage points, erecting observation towers on safe land promontories, but the draw of sitting on sandy beaches under the sun would be gone for good. Financial markets would absorb the shock through rising commodity prices. With shipping rerouted and fishing yields slashed, the cost of goods, from imported fruits to tin cans, would climb. Energy costs would follow as offshore production slows. Consumer inflation would spike in coastal nations, further squeezing household budgets. Credit rating agencies might downgrade sovereign debt for countries with significant maritime exposure, compounding difficulties in servicing external loans and derailing infrastructure projects. In health and nutrition sectors, seafood deficits would force reliance on alternative proteins, soy, insects, lab-grown meats, but these substitutes lack the widespread cultural acceptance of fish in many diets. Malnutrition rates could rise in communities where fish consumption is vital. Governments might subsidize fish imports, but at enormous fiscal cost. The ripple effect on supply chains, from fertilizer makers to canneries, would be profound, as every stage in the seafood value chain adapts to lower yields and higher risks. In the final reckoning, the economics of fear would redraw coastlines not only on nautical charts, but in ledgers around the globe. Industries once proud of their maritime heritage shipping giants, coastal resorts, fishing cooperatives, would endure bankruptcies and consolidations. Governments would wage regulatory battles over exclusion zones, hull standards, and marine protected areas. Innovation sprinted by the need for shark deterrence could yield breakthroughs in materials science and bioacoustics. But the cost of that progress would be paid by the communities and companies caught in the shadow of nature as ultimate predator. In every seaside town, the question would linger: is the price of safety worth the loss of the ocean as bounty? The answer would define the next chapter in our fraught relationship with the world's final frontier, the deep blue home of a beast that refuses to remain a myth. For centuries, the Megalodon was a creature of fossils and conjecture, its massive teeth unearthed on distant beaches, inspiring fleeting curiosity among paleontologists and casual collectors alike. But even in its absence, the Leviathan's legend never truly faded. Documentaries began weaving its story into the tapestry of prehistoric life, elevating the shark to icon status and cementing its place in popular consciousness. Programs like History of the Megalodon captivated millions by juxtaposing computer-generated reconstructions with modern-day footage of great whites, stressing the sheer scale of the ancient giant and hinting at the chaos its survival would unleash in today's oceans. Viewers tuned in for the spectacle of the past, yet found themselves grappling with the possibility that such a creature might still lurk beneath the waves. Cinema soon seized upon this collective fascination. Blockbusters recast Megalodon as the ultimate cinematic villain, outgrowing conventional shark attack tropes to become an unstoppable force of nature. Filmmakers toggled between horror and awe, imagining first encounters in recreational scuba dives turned catastrophes, or high-speed chases across open water as luxury yachts became bait. In these narratives, the shark metamorphosed into a mythic antagonist, part prehistoric echo, part cosmic retribution, its on-screen triumphs sparking fascination that blurred the line between fiction and fear. Within weeks of a major film release, viral fan edits attempted to splice documentary footage into movie trailers, as if sightings had leapt off the editing table and into real life. At the center of this fervor, literature surged with new Megalodon chronicles. Authors of eco-thrillers seized the concept as allegory, crafting tales of corporate negligence that unleashed the beast upon coastal communities, forcing inhabitants to reckon with nature's resurgence. Young adult series reimagined Megalodon as a sentient being, capable of complex behavior and even rudimentary communication, while graphic novels depicted it as a guardian of the deep, punishing industrial overreach. These works reframed the predator not merely as an adversary, but as a symbol of ecological rage, a narrative device through which readers explored themes of hubris, extinction, and the primal forces that predate humanity. Meanwhile, the documentary circuit exploded with ever more sensational programming. Cable networks dedicated weeks to special Megalodon exposes, interviewing experts who claimed sonar anomalies and grainy submersible footage hinted at extant populations. One popular show featured a fully staged expedition, a chartered vessel deploying baited ROVs into uncharted trenches, culminating in a moment of breathless anticipation as a dark shape drifted into view on a monitor only to recede into the murk before revealing its identity. Though many viewers recognized the dramatization, the repeated blend of fact and staged fiction stoked belief that the giant shark might indeed prowl hidden canyons. On streaming platforms, serialized docudramas adopted a quasi journalistic style, chronicling real investigators' quests to confirm sightings. Host presenters, some with backgrounds in marine biology, others with no formal credentials, spoke in hushed tones about clandestine sonar pings and clandestine swimmer disappearances. Soundtracks pulsed with ominous beats as the camera lingered on empty diving cages swaying in the current. While critics decried these shows as pseudoscience, audiences addicted to mystery devoured each cliffhanger, forwarding episodes and igniting Reddit threads that parsed every frame for hidden clues. This media maelstrom birthed online communities that oscillated between skepticism and fervent belief. Subforums sprang up where amateur oceanographers posted bathymetric maps marking hotspots of alleged Megalodon activity. Enthusiasts cataloged every washed-up tooth, however small, in regional beachcomber groups, measuring serration depth and enamel thickness to match them against museum specimens. One fan-run website compiled a global Megalodon Encounter Atlas, complete with interactive maps, survivor testimonials, and instructions for deploying sonar buoys. The site's moderators insisted their work was scientific, yet their conspiratorial stance that government agencies suppressed proof of the shark's existence lent the community a fringe cult aura. Merchandising soon followed suit. Marine biology supply stores began selling replica Megalodon teeth-scaled-up versions stamped with serial numbers, marketed as collector's relics. Clothing brands launched shark tooth pendants, bathers, and wetsuits painted with bold designs evoking the beast's ferocity. Even luxury watchmakers tapped the craze, releasing timepieces bearing fossil-inspired dials and shark fin motifs on the bezel. Cafes in coastal towns offered Megalodon macchiatos, decorated with latte art depicting the shark's silhouette barreling through turbulent swells. These commercial gestures transformed the ancient predator into a fashionable emblem, its toothy grin emblazoned on everything from skateboards to smartphone cases. In the undercurrents of this fascination, spiritual movements began to coalesce. Inspired by indigenous stories of sea, Guardians myths of Kraken and Leviathan neo-pagan and New Age circles incorporated Megalodon into rites of ocean reverence. Altars adorned with shark teeth and sea glass appeared in pagan festivals, accompanied by chants honoring the Great Deep One. Shamans and self-styled ocean priestesses led ceremonies at high tide, casting offerings of dried seaweed and driftwood into the surf, seeking the shark's blessing for safe passage and ecological redemption. The rituals melded science fiction spectacle with ancient seafaring traditions, forging a hybrid creed that venerated the shark as both muse and deity. These emergent oceanist sects preached a theology of deep-sea interconnectedness. They taught that modern humanity's exploitation of marine environments had awoken the sleeping titan, and that by worshipping the shark, followers might appease its wrath. Monthly gatherings on isolated beaches featured firelight processions, chanting in sync with the rhythm of waves, as participants threw symbolic shark's teeth carved from stone onto smoldering pyres. Video uploads of these ceremonies, complete with slow-motion drone footage of participants forming circle dances at the shoreline, garnered millions of views, introducing the ritual to a global audience hungry for immersive myth-making. The academic world responded with both intrigue and alarm. Anthropologists launched field studies to document the rise of megalodonist groups, conducting interviews to understand how myth and science intertwined in the digital age. Journals of Religious Studies published special issues on techno-spiritual syncretism, examining how followers reinterpreted scientific data, sonar pings, and tooth fragment analyses as holy signs. While some researchers labeled the phenomenon a passing fad, others warned it represented a deeper human need to reassert mystery in an era of simulation and oversharing. Meanwhile, charismatic personalities emerged as public faces of the shark revival. On social media platforms, influencers donned shark tooth necklaces and branded apparel, staging photo shoots beside wave-battered cliffs. One particularly flamboyant Megalodon prophet live-streamed nightly ocean awakenings, claiming to sense the beast's psychic presence. Followers donated lavish gifts, boats, dive equipment, even small submersibles as offerings, hoping to earn a vision or blessing. The prophet's Patreon crowdfunding soared, financing what he called expeditions to commune with the Ancient One. Authorities handled the growing persona with caution, torn between freedom of belief and concerns over public safety near frequently used launch sites. As obsession deepened, even mainstream tourism developers capitalized on the mania. Coastal towns designated Megalodon heritage sites, complete with interpretive centers showcasing fossil replicas, interactive sonar displays, and staged sighting bell towers. Visitors paid for guided night tours along cliffside paths, listening to reenactments of legendary shark encounters narrated by actors in naval attire. Gift shops sold binoculars marked with Shark Watch logos, and concession stands sold popcorn in cups shaped like open shark jaws. By day, families photographed herons and gulls. By night, they congregated beneath spotlights, scanning the sea for signs of the shadowed giant. In virtual realms, gaming studios released titles where players navigated a world reclaimed by Megalodon, either as survivors scavenging the post-apocalyptic coast or as the shark itself commanding the ocean's depths. Expanded reality apps overlaid AR models of the shark onto live camera feeds, allowing users to lock on their smartphone to an imagined predator lurking off the local beach. These games blurred the boundary between entertainment and obsession, as in-game achievements, first blood, alpha predator, pumped dopamine in player brains, conditioning them to crave more intense shark encounters, albeit virtual. Academic institutions, seeing a teachable moment, created cross-disciplinary courses on Megalodon in media, myth, and science. Professors lectured on the interplay between cinematic spectacle, social media algorithms, and cultural memory. Students analyzed documentary scripts, dissected fan fiction narratives, and interviewed cult members about their spiritual beliefs. Thesis projects ranged from hands-on sonar mapping experiments off local shores to the design of ethical codes for broadcast depiction of the living shark. Research grants, once hard to secure for paleontology, poured in under emergency initiatives to fund public engagement in real-world myth. Concurrently, merchandising conglomerates went further down the cult path. Luxury brands released divine relic collections pendants made from megalodon tooth fragments ethically sourced, from fossil beds marketed as talismans for protection and insight. Perfume houses distilled bespoke scents named Ocean's Echo, packaged in bottles shaped like shark gills. Tattoo parlors proliferated shore to shore, offering megalodon-themed designs inked with ultraviolet ink for dramatic glow in blacklight raves. The imagery of the ancient shark seeped into subcultures, from goth beach parties to fitness influencers showcasing predator strikes in workout videos. As these cultural currents swelled, public policy threads entwined with the obsession. Some coastal municipalities declared Shark Appreciation Days, combining ecological education with homage to the returning legend. Mayors donned shark tooth medals in press conferences, advocating for shark refugia and museum expansions. Environmental NGOs hammered out partnerships with religious groups to leverage the cult's reach in marine conservation campaigns, hoping to channel fanaticism into policy support for marine protected areas. A shared language of myth provided traction for legislative victories that decades of clinical science campaigns had failed to achieve. Yet beneath the pageantry, a darker undercurrent churned. Extremist offshoots, apex revivalists, advocated for the literal release of captive great white sharks into the wild to bolster megalodon gene pools based on fringe genetic theories. Urban legend positioned these activists as modern druids, performing nighttime beach ceremonies to summon the beast. Authorities monitored these fringe cells, wary of mass gatherings too close to the surf. The proliferation of conspiracy theories, secret government breeding programs, underwater cloning labs amplified public anxiety, straining both law enforcement and marine science communication. The celebrity scientists who once led measured discourse found themselves grappling with unprecedented demands. Popular marine biologists took to social media platforms in desperate attempts to counter misinformation, hosting live Q&A sessions dubbed Ask a Shark Scientist. These sessions, however, were inundated with questions about how to join shark cults, how to locate megalodon on recreational sonar, or more ominously, how to harvest shark teeth for use in rituals. The line between educational outreach and cult facilitation blurred as experts scrambled to reclaim the narrative. By the time peer-reviewed studies emerged confirming the shark's presence via environmental DNA sampling, the cult of megalodon was already woven into the cultural fabric. Universities hosted symposiums under banners reading From Fossil to Flesh, The Return of the Megalodon, complete with keynote speakers in shark tooth headdresses. Some religious communities petitioned to have Megalodon Sunday added to local calendars. A day of fasting, surmising that the shark's return signaled an ecological apocalypse requiring spiritual preparation. Even after the initial excitement plateaued, the human obsession endured. Shark sanctuaries, places designated to protect megalodon from overzealous hunters, sprouted alongside shark culling debates. A global nonprofit, Shark Legacy International, was formed to maintain underwater cameras in key sites. broadcasting endless loops of shadowy fins for both worshippers and skeptics. Textiles printed with Megalodon-inspired motifs became everyday wear, signaling membership in a worldwide subculture that revered the ancient predator as an emblem of untamed nature. In the end, the return of the Megalodon would stand as perhaps the greatest testament to humanity's need. In documentaries, we sought scientific truth. In cults, we sought spiritual connection. In fandoms, we sought communal thrill. In commerce, we sought profit. The giant shark, once thought extinct, became a mirror reflecting every facet of our collective psyche, our fears, our desires, and our endless hunger for legends coming alive. As long as the ocean continues its restless churn, the Megalodon will swim not only in the waters of the deep, but in the currents of human imagination, forever bridging the realms of myth and reality. Few questions stir as much wonder as this. If Megalodon, the monumental shark of the Miocene seas, had somehow endured, where would it live today? Would it lurk only in the ocean's shadowy abysses, hidden in trenches beyond human reach? Or would it glide into our busiest shipping lanes in coastal waters, rewriting everything we know about marine life and human safety? The answer lies in a tapestry of physiology, prey availability, oceanography, and the unexpected behaviors of large predators forced to adapt to a world reshaped by climate and human activity. Fossil records place Megalodon squarely in warm, shallow seas rich with prey. Juvenile baleen whales, seals, large fish, and even other sharks. Its tooth distribution, from the Carolina coast to Peru's shorelines, from Western Europe to Australia maps, a giant predator cruising continental shelves rather than abyssal plains. Warm temperatures around 20 to 25 degrees Celsius. Abundant game within a few hundred meters of the surface, and seasonal whale migrations all provided the perfect hunting grounds for a creature demanding enormous caloric intake. Fast forward to today, and those environments remain the most compelling habitat candidates. Yet the modern ocean is not the Miocene. It's colder in many places. Prey distributions have shifted, and human impacts from overfishing to shipping traffic have altered the underwater landscape. Physiology stands at the heart of any habitat question. Megalodons size up to 20 meters in length and weighing upwards of 50 tons implies a prodigious metabolism. While lamnid sharks, such as the great white, can regulate blood temperature through countercurrent heat exchangers, retaining warmth in red muscle tissues, they cannot venture indefinitely into the freezing depths. Great whites make deep dives, sometimes a kilometer or more, yet they return to warmer surface waters after mere hours. Megalodon, with even greater mass and an even more demanding metabolism, would face stronger barriers in cold, deep water. Its enormous liver, packed with squalene to aid buoyancy, would also serve as an energy reserve butt, sustaining tens of tons of tissue at near 2 degrees Celsius, would drain those reserves far faster than in equatorial shoals. Oxygen availability further constrains depth. Modern oxygen minimum zones begin around 500 meters in many ocean basins, deepening only in the clearest, most tropical waters. These zones compress the midwater column into pockets of scarce air, forcing large predators either to surface regularly or to remain in well-oxygenated layers above. Megalodon's gill structures, designed to process vast water volumes for oxygen extraction, would struggle where dissolved oxygen dips below 3 milligrams per liter. It could plunge into deeper waters on rare occasions, tracking whales or squid, but it could not spend long hunting in the middle of the twilight zone without risking hypoxia. Prey distribution, too, anchors Megalodon's likely range near coasts. The largest whales form feeding and breeding grounds on continental shelves and in warm lagoons, not in trench bottoms. Humpbacks and gray whales travel along predictable routes from nutrient-rich polar waters to sheltered bays for calving. Those same routes would double as highways for a giant shark. Modern whale-watching hotspots, Monterey Bay, the Sea of Quartz, Hervey Bay could become hunting grounds for a living Megalodon. Its presence would force whales to shift to deeper, cooler canyons, 30-kilometer-long gorges, where slope currents deliver cold, oxygenated waters down to depths greater than 800 meters. But those waters would still lie north of the true abyss. Ultimately, the shark's prey define its home. Human activity complicates matters further. Shipping lanes crisscross continental margins like invisible ribbons. Container ships, tankers, cruise liners, and fishing fleets maintain near constant presence in waters less than 1,000 meters deep. Noise pollution, sonar pings, ship propeller cavitation all create acoustic interference that stresses marine life. Modern tagging studies show great whites avoid noisy corridors whenever possible, gravitating toward quieter upwellings. Could Megalodon adapt by seeking refuge during daylight hours in deeper canyons, surfacing at night when bulk carrier traffic diminishes? Perhaps acoustic pollution might drive a giant shark into brief periods of deeper refuge. Yet after human-caused changes in whale distributions, such as shifting feeding over seamounts to avoid whale-watching vessels, Megalodon's prey would still return to the shelf. The shark's survival would hinge on its willingness to share waters with humankind, a risk few wild animals choose. Larval and juvenile survival demands add another layer. Modern lamnid sharks give birth to live young, often returning to the same nursery grounds off Florida, South Australia, or Mexico shallow, warm water coves rich in small fish and protected from larger predators. Extending this model, Megalodon would need nursery lagoons free from adult predation and abundant in prey. Shallow embayments, such as Japan's storm-sheltered bays or the tropical mangrove labyrinths of Indonesia, could serve. But those areas lie well within coastal human zones. By necessity, Megalodon pups would navigate both the threats of adult Megalodon and the threats of benthic fishing nets and recreational divers. Only the cleverest, most elusive mothers would succeed in shielding their young until they reach a size that deters both conspecifics and human curiosity. Even absent human interference, the deep sea poses challenges. Food scarcity in the trench means no sustained mega-ecosystem can exist miles below the photic zone. Detritus and marine snow feed specialized communities of amphipods, brittle stars, and squat lobsters. But millions of tons of flesh would be needed to sustain a predator the size of a bus. Megalodon's relatives, the early Carcharoccals and Otodus species, flourished in upwelling systems, not in hadal depths. Without the energy input of plankton and small fish near the surface, there's simply nothing for a giant shark to hunt. Even mammoth sperm whales feed on squid, only at intermediate depths before returning to the oxygen-rich epipelagic zone. Should Megalodon find itself confined to the darkest trenches, it would face physiological decline. The weight of its own body, supported by cartilage rather than bone, could buckle under extreme hydrostatic pressure. Modern deep-sea fish adapt by reducing skeletal calcification, developing gelatinous tissues, and accumulating trimethylamine oxide to protect proteins. Megalodon's need for rigid cartilage to support muscle attachments and resist torque during feeding would clash with these adaptations. A trade-off between bone-like rigidity and the pliable structure needed to survive depths of 8,000 meters seems insurmountable. In essence, trenches would trap a shark incapable of living there for long. Yet life is rarely so constrained. Megalodon might exploit deep-water canyon structures, carved into continental slopes that plunge 1 or 2 kilometers below the surface, yet remain warmer and more oxygenated than abyssal plains. Modern fisheries off California's Farallon Islands show large fish aggregating around canyon heads, feasting on migrating squid and lanternfish. In these canyons, currents funnel nutrient-rich waters upward, creating localized food webs. A Megalodon could lurk here, hidden from passing ships, bursting forth to seize unsuspecting prey before vanishing into darkness. The midnight zone, roughly from 200 to 1,000 meters, could provide a balance. A cooler refuge during daylight and a hunting ground when prey descends deeper. Seasonal and diel vertical migrations of plankton orchestrate larger food movements. Cetaceans chase the plankton at dawn and dusk, ascending and descending hundreds of meters. Megalodon gifted with keen electrosensory perception could exploit this cycle. It might patrol at mid-depth during the day, surfacing only to break respiration layers under cover of darkness, then follow the prey now near the surface. Such strategies exist among large predatory fish. Tunas and billfish employ a blend of epipelagic and mesopelagic feeding. Megalodon's gigantic form would magnify these patterns, its presence altering not only whale travels, but the entire architecture of vertical migration corridors. Human technology would play a paradoxical role. Sonar arrays detect massive echoes, but can distort animal behavior. Hydrophone networks might broadcast ultra-low frequencies to trace the shark's presence. Yet those same frequencies could repel it or drive it into unfamiliar zones. Feeding events tracked by tagged whales could provide location data, as massive brood whales trail behind calves flagged with satellite tags. Automated buoys could detect sudden drops in ambient noise silence, proceeds in ambush and flash alerts to coordinating vessels. Over time, Megalodon could learn to avoid recurring acoustic traps, shifting its territory in subtle, unpredictable ways. The busiest seas then become both theaters of conflict and opportunities for adaptation. In shipping lanes where the Pacific garbage patch looms, Megalodon might follow large flotsam fields, drifting derelict vessels, and fishery debris that attract schooling fish and turtles. Here, moderate prey concentrations exist, and the shark could feed opportunistically on turtle carcasses and large fish struck by nets. Yet this behavior risks entanglement in Ghost Net's derelict gear, hung with barnacles and awaiting capture. Modern rescue diver teams already disentangle whales caught in nets. Adding Megalodon to their roster would test both nerve and equipment. Still, the coastal shallows remain the richest stage. Whale-breeding lagoons, heavy with calf blubber, hold irresistible allure. Towns built on sheltered coves would find themselves broadcasting evacuation sirens at the first sonar ping. Fishing piers would shutter nets, and even paddleboarders would carry mini-sonar detectors to warn of approaching fins. Megalodon, relentless in its hunger, would chase the whales, surfacing repeatedly in waters less than 50 meters deep waters we consider safest for swimming. Beach culture, once synonymous with relaxed days under the sun, would pivot toward boarded-up beaches and razor wire netting, a stark reminder that the surface of the ocean is no longer a limit to be crossed without trepidation. Over time, a dynamic equilibrium might emerge. Whales, adapting their breeding and feeding, would favor deeper, cooler bays, perhaps moving calving grounds to new estuaries, less accessible to Megalodon in summer thermal layers. The shark in turn would refine patrol routes, using the memory of past successes to return each season. A coexistence would develop much like modern interactions between coastal communities and great white populations in South Africa or Australia. An uneasy tolerance underpinned by technology, regulations, and the sheer respect inspired by a creature that spans human imagination and prehistoric reality. In short, Megalodon could not survive solely in the abyssal trenches, nor would it confine itself permanently to dark canyons. Its life would demand a fluid navigation of the water column, from continental shelf shallows to mid-water trenches, dictated by prey, temperature, oxygen, and human presence. It would appear in our busiest seas, not as a roaming terror, but as a necessary apex predator sculpting the modern marine ecosystem. In fleeing from its shadow, we would learn new oceanic truths about physiological limits, behavioral adaptation, and the enduring mystery of a world where giants once again rise to hunt beneath the waves. If a living Megalodon still prowled the oceans, the question would not be how we might vanquish it, but whether we could forge a fragile peace with nature's most formidable apex predator. This is the ultimate test of coexistence. A creature born in an ancient sea A predator unmatched in scale and power, now navigating a world reshaped by human hands. Could our technology, our laws, and our will to adapt hold in the face of a shark whose very being reminds us that evolution operates on a timeline far older and broader than any human enterprise? Megalodon's sheer size and metabolism define the battleground. A 15 to 20 meter shark weighing upwards of 50 tons demands prodigious energy, roughly 2 tons of prey per day by conservative estimates. Its buoyant liver packed with squalene would support long-distance patrols, but only in waters warm enough to fuel its red muscle tissues. In colder seas or the crushing darkness of true trenches, physiology would betray it. Blood cooled too low, oxygen scarce at depth, its massive frame would lose the advantage that once made it the sea's undisputed titan. Even a creature of near-invincible design must bow to the laws of thermodynamics and oxygen diffusion. Ecologically, Megalodon returns as both surgeon and wrecking law. Apex predators regulate prey populations and shape habitat use by whales, dolphins, and pinnipeds. In a modern ocean already under stress from overfishing and climate change, a giant shark hunting calves in nursery lagoons could trigger trophic cascades far more severe than we've ever witnessed. Whale numbers would dwindle in key breeding grounds. Phytoplankton blooms fueled by whale fecal plumes would decline, and fish populations reliant on those blooms would collapse. This cascade would ripple through entire marine food webs, reminding us that apex consumers hold the reins of ecosystem balance. Humankind's response would be a dizzying blend of engineering and diplomacy. Sonar arrays and hydrophone networks could track the shark's patrols, feeding real-time alerts to coastal authorities. Acoustic deterrence bubble curtains and low-frequency pulses tuned to disrupt the shark. Ampulla of Lorenzini might fence off critical whale calving bays. Ships could install retractable shark curtains around hulls, while fishing fleets retrofit nets with sacrificial outer panels designed to shear off rather than ensnare a curious megalodon tooth. Yet every deterrent risks collateral damage to dolphins, turtles, and the smaller sharks that anchor today's marine economies. Modern shipping lanes, once the safest highways on the water, would become gauntlets of caution. Cargo vessels could alter routes to avoid known megalodon corridors, adding thousands of nautical miles and incalculable fuel costs. Offshore platforms might host surveillance drones around the clock, transforming oil rigs and wind farms into floating high-security zones. Smaller craft fishing boats, dive charters, pleasure yachts would shrink their operational footprints or vanish entirely from open sea. Coastal industries would shift inward, erecting inland wave pools, simulated lagoons, and recirculating aquaculture systems to replace the bounty lost to a resurgent predator. Legal frameworks would codify coexistence protocols. International conventions under the auspices of the United Nations would designate megalodon management areas, sanctuaries balancing protection for the shark with safeguards for human livelihoods. Marine protected areas would expand offshore, restricting trawling and shipping to narrow corridors. Permits for noisy naval exercises would mandate seismic-friendly windows. Fines for unauthorized entry into predator zones would climb alongside an ecosystem restoration fee, funding research into non-lethal deterrence and habitat monitoring. Humanity's desire to dominate the last frontier of the deep would be tempered by treaties extolling restraint and respect. Culturally, the shark would reclaim its place in our collective imagination. Festivals once celebrating beach culture would evolve into ocean vigil gatherings, nighttime ceremonies, honoring the boundary between land and sea. Coastal museums would feature live sensor feeds from buoys, monitoring shark movements, offering a communal experience that replaces casual swimming with deep water reverence. Artists would paint the shark as both monster and muse, a symbol of nature as remorseless beauty, a reminder that our dominion is as fleeting as the spray on the prow of a speeding ship. Yet technology and policy alone cannot mask the raw truth. Megalodon embodies the primacy of evolution. It teaches us humility. No matter how thick our hulls or loud our deterrents, the ocean remains nature's domain. The shark's return would force a reckoning with our own limits, a recognition that every creature shaped by millions of years of selection carries within it an authority we cannot override. Coexistence would demand that we accept the shark as right to roam just as we accept the sun's rise and fall, the tides ebb and flow. In practice, coexistence efforts might succeed in pockets. Whale nurseries fitted with non-invasive sonar arrays could deter large predators just as grizzly bears avoid electric fences around salmon streams. Fisheries could operate under rotation schemes, moving gear seasonally to minimize conflict. Ecotourism might survive behind bulletproof glass walls and submerged viewing platforms, offering glimpses of both shark and whale in a controlled frontier that satisfies wonder without courting disaster. However, nature's unpredictability would always lurk beneath every plan. A single storm could disable buoy-mounted sensors. A rogue tide scatter deterrent nets. An unscheduled whale migration open a window for an ambush. Every contraption could fail, every regulation be outpaced by instinct. The shark, guided by the same ancient wiring that honed it for ambush millions of years ago, would slip through nets and sonar pings with the stealth of a ghost. In those moments, our vaunted mastery would feel like sand in the jaws of a creature that has waited eons for this chance. Philosophically, the shark's return would be a crucible for human identity. We would see ourselves not as apex creatures, but as guests on nature's stage actors, improvising in a play written by the laws of life itself. There would be no villain and no hero, only survival. We might crown ourselves stewards of the planet, yet stewardship implies deference as much as authority. In every action, be it deploying bubble curtains or retreating from beaches, we would be learning that nature's domain yields only to humility. Ultimately, the question of coexistence would distill to a single truth. If coexistence means shaping human endeavors around an unstoppable predator, then nature has, once again, imposed its terms. We could erect fences, craft treaties, and innovate technologies, but the world's final verdict would be written in the shark's pattern of movement and feeding. Where we find the courage to adapt redistributing our fishing efforts, redesigning our ships, and living in awe of the shark's presence, we glimpse a fragile harmony. Where we see only an obstacle to human will, we court conflict destined to remind us that nature always wins. In the final analysis, could we coexist? Yes, if coexistence means recognizing that the ocean is not ours to command, but ours to share at the mercy of forces older than timekeeping, older than human ambition. Could we subdue the shark completely? No. The very thought betrays the arrogance that brought us to the brink of environmental collapse. Megalodon's shadow across the seas would teach that survival is not a conquest, but a negotiation, a constant balancing act between power and prudence. In that negotiation, every sunrise over the waves would be a triumph of humility, and every safe harbor a tribute to nature's enduring sovereignty. Conclusion. From the sunlit lagoons of the Miocene to the abyssal canyons of today, our journey through 15 chapters has traced the arc of Earth's greatest shark, and in doing so has held up a mirror to our own ambitions and fears. We began by imagining oceans awash with giants, then measured the Megalodon's staggering length and crushing bite. We watched it stalk whales and dolphins, ray-drew shipping lanes in its shadow, and witnessed the collapse of industries built on complacent coasts. We explored the cult of fascination that springs from myth-made flesh, the race to study living fossils, and the uneasy dance between deterrence and diplomacy. Ultimately, we posed the final question. Can humanity share the seas with nature's most formidable predator? Or will we learn once again that evolution writes the rules? This video has shown that the Megalodon, real or imagined, provokes more than terror. It teaches humility. No matter how thick our hulls or complex our treaties, the ocean remains a realm older and vaster than any human design. Yet within this challenge lies opportunity to innovate non-lethal deterrence, to craft policies that honor both predator and prey, to celebrate the wild mysteries that remind us our stewardship carries both power and responsibility. As the credits roll, we return to the surface forever changed. The Megalodon stands not just as a symbol of prehistoric might, but as an invitation to practice awe instead of conquest, to recognize that coexistence demands respect, and to cherish the boundless unknown still lurking beneath every wave. In the silent wake it leaves, we find our greatest frontier, learning to live in harmony with nature's final, most majestic law.